Welcome. Research Stream 3. I ended up finishing the lyrics for this song, so we'll start out with this.
Okay, I'm sick of everything. Perspective needing editing. Foundation needs releveling. How fragile, how unsettling. Okay, I'm sick of everything. I'm numb to all of your lies. I don't find you threatening. I find your five eyes unwise. Okay, I'm sick of everything. Perspective needing editing. Foundation needs releveling. How fragile, how unsettling. Okay, I'm sick of everything. I'm numb to all of your lies. I don't find you threatening. I find your five eyes unwise. Those aren't cries of happiness. The cold steel of the gladiator's gladius. Tip sharp at the back of the neck, whether wanted or not. A revolution we're having. They're deep in the state of the program. They are deep in the state of the mind. Yeah. Deep in the pocket, deep in the slumber. They're deep in the government, and now they're above you. Everything I'm telling you, they'll tell you it's a heresy. Cause none dare would call it conspiracy. But I'm the kook, I'm a zealot, I'm a frog, I'm a lightning rod, I'm a right-wing nut job. I speak and the vampires shudder. Full throttle, no handle on the rudder. Unraveling voices stutter. Cut to the heart, hot knife through butter, huh? Okay, I'm sick of everything. Perspective needing editing. Foundation needs releveling. How fragile, how unsettling. Okay, I'm sick of everything. I'm numb to all of your lies. I don't find you threatening. I find your five eyes unwise. Okay, I'm sick of everything. Perspective needing editing. Foundation needs releveling. How fragile, how unsettling. Okay, I'm sick of everything. I'm numb to all of your lies. I don't find you threatening. I find your five eyes unwise. Those aren't cheers of happiness. Pitter patter red shoes at the Vatican. Sold out to the one world orders. Whore on the beast, same whore on the waters. Unfaithful, vows of slaughter. Opposite of life, not a life or a daughter. Plotter, not aware that I bought her. Opposite of truth, not a thing that I taught her. Everything I'm telling you, they'll tell you it's a heresy. Cause none dare would call it conspiracy. But I'm the kook, I'm a zealot, I'm a frog, I'm a lightning rod, I'm a right-wing nut job. I speak and the vampires shudder. Full throttle, no handle on the rudder. Unraveling voices stutter. Cut to the heart, hot knife through butter, huh?
I'm dancing right now.
Okay, I'm sick of everything. Perspective needing editing. Foundation needs releveling. How fragile, how unsettling. Okay, I'm sick of everything. I'm numb to all of your lies. I don't find you threatening. I find your five eyes unwise. Okay, I'm sick of everything. Perspective needing editing. Foundation needs releveling. How fragile, how unsettling. Okay, I'm sick of everything. I'm numb to all of your lies. I don't find you threatening. I find your five eyes unwise.
See, I gotta let it run out. I can't be rude. Jump in prematurely there. Welcome. Welcome to the stream, and Merry Christmas. Happy New Year. This has been a fun week with family and remembering our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. And we are going to jump right back into where we left off. And in fact, maybe we start out here and just kind of let me let you in on what I've been doing while I've been away. Because I did add a little bit of timeline to our Miro map here. So I think before we left, we had only had a few names here to dive into that had been mentioned in the prologue of our book. None dare call it conspiracy here that we're reading. And yeah, so I don't know where to start. I kind of went a little big brain, and I actually just copied my timeline from another map that I had. So a lot of it was already done. Don't think that I put all this together just in the last week or so. especially with the holiday going on. But I did spend a lot of time putting this together, just kind of getting it organized for us so that we have a timeline to put everything up against. So, for example, a lot of what we read and what we will read is going to happen here during this time frame. So our book, None Dare Call It Conspiracy, it was originally released in 1971, and the copy that we're reading is called Call It Conspiracy, the sequel that was released in 1985. So again, this span has happened in between releases, and this is the area of focus in the narrative part of the book that we're reading. So it's just, for me, as I'm reading a book, I think for anybody, if you're reading a book, you should be aware of the context the book's in. And so this timeline and kind of understanding things helps me to really soak in what I'm learning or as I'm reading. So we're going to do it together. So I've got a kind of zoomed in portion here where from 1975 moving forward, each one of these cubes is going to represent a single year. So we can zoom in even more and get as detailed as we want. I kind of already put some information on Watergate that we can go over. The Gulf of Tonkin, the Vietnam War, the transition from Johnson to Nixon, through it all. This is what's happening geopolitically, socially, militarily, with Mystery Babylon and the military-industrial complex, all while this book is coming out. And somewhere in between here is where we have our warning from Ezra Taft Benson, who recommends this book to read. And I've got that over here in our Perplexities session. So again, in terms of the flow of how the Perplexities series will go, obviously we've got to explain what the heck we're doing, what the purpose is, why we're studying the Perplexities, why are geopolitics and the wars and rumors of wars necessary? Well, we always point back to, hey, we're commanded to study these things, by the way. And even more in our cosmic framework, we understand that this is temple curriculum. That understanding nations and the downfall of the Gentiles, the prophetic vision that Daniel sees is essentially what we're talking about, the conclusion of that. When the stone cut from the mountain without hands destroys and shatters all of the Gentile worldly kingdoms, all of the nations, right? You and I are living through that. The gathering of Israel is a part of that, and that's what is immediately before us and what we are working through right now. But as part of the fulfilling of all of God's covenants, the kingdom of God will rise on earth above all other nations. So we are talking about the government of God being revealed, as we've done before, where you have a total melding of ecclesiastical kingdom of God and political kingdom of God, the woman and the man-child from Revelation. So again, this is just the purpose, kind of this is how we will filter our mind in when you're addressing someone. At least to me, this is all me sandboxing this live with you guys here. But I think what's the most efficient way to teach this stuff to somebody? Because most of the time, if you just come at them with conspiracy angles, with, hey, did you know about this? Or let me red pill you on that. It's not as attractive to people who aren't in a mind state to see things that way. So for me, I think the best hook, like what's the best bait and hook that you would use for the fish we're trying to catch? If we're fishers of men trying to warn them about things that we've seen and fulfill our calling here as we've been called to warn, that's what the scriptures as we read in 88 continue to say. Like after you study these things, warn your neighbor, right? And let them know of these the abomination of desolation and the destructions and the judgments upon nations and all of these things. But what's the best bait to use as fishers of men to hook people into this vision, into the prophecy of Christ, into his coming as King of Kings, what the millennial reign is, like what the Latter-day Church represents? It's not just a social thing. Like we are preparing the world for the second coming. And this, I believe, is our duty that we independently are to perform, to be prepared for that day, as it says, when he will call us again, that ye may be prepared in all things when I shall send you again to magnify the calling whereunto I have given you, the mission with which I have commissioned you. I sent you out to testify and warn the people, and it becometh every man who hath been warned to warn his neighbor. So what's the best bait and hook for this? For me, it's been to associate conspiracy and all of this angle that we're going to be talking about to prophecy. That when you understand the underlying prophetic vision of how these men in all these dispensations previously looked forward to the millennium and the building up of everything that would happen, and how Daniel's and Ezekiel's and all of the prophets of the Old Testament, their visions saw this. They saw all of this. They didn't dismiss politics from ecclesiastical understanding or theology like we do today. Everything's so compartmentalized. Everything's so fractured. Everything's so broken apart and accessorized. It's cafeteriaized. You get to just pick and choose whatever parts of reality or layers of history that you want to incorporate in your worldview. That's what everybody kind of chooses to do. And our vision with Melchizedek syncretism and the gospel and prophecy is that, hey, all of it can fit. And we'll see, too, as we start to uncover the dueling dispensations of both deceit here is what we'll be focusing on, this Mystery Babylon the underlying secret combinations and their deceitful ideologies. That's what these books focus on. None dare call it conspiracy and communism, socialism, all of these isms, right? In your mind, I want you, if you're listening to me and following me along, what has helped me the most is to understand these things as just tools for the secret combination. All of the isms, even capitalism, is used and worn as a skin suit and abused, and the borders are pushed so that the underlying motives of a group that wants to control the world, global dominance, that they're the ones that just use these different ideas to push around nation states to their whims and their ideas, their collective web. So it doesn't matter if it's a socialism, a fascism, a communism. Yes, there are subtle differences, and we'll talk about them. But think of all of them as they're not the real issue. The real issue is evil men subjugating everyone else against their will and taking their earnings. They're just men taking over the world and abusing dominion. Like how we have, we'll read about certain big philosophers and smart people that the world renounds that'll say things like, power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. That's a late 1800s phrase that's quoted repeat amongst the wisdom circles of today. But Joseph Smith was teaching the same things in Doctrine and Covenants about the priesthood and unrighteous dominion. And that as soon as a man get a little dominion or power, or he gets a calling or a title or anything, he is tempted, the natural man, to abuse it, to begin exercising unrighteous dominion. This is that power corrupting, absolute power corrupting, that kind of idea. It's not new to the world of politics and the people want to talk about it. Joseph Smith was talking about these things a whole 100 years before everyone else. So again, this should be right up our alley to see all these things. It's kind of baked into what Joseph Smith taught in our doctrine. And I'm kind of rambling, but I just want to go over, okay, so here's like the beginnings. The why is the scriptural references, the prophetic warnings pointing directly to these books. And now we're looking at this book to say, okay, what are the ideas in this book? None dare call it conspiracy. What is it that he's saying resonates so much with the message of the Book of Mormon and secret combinations taking over everything? So it's where you have the dispensations of deceit, Lehi's vision, Nephi's vision, where you have the tree of life on one side and the floating building of philosophies of men mingled with scripture on one side. This is the dispensation of deceit here in the latter days. So just like our dispensation has prophets, so here's the latter day restoration. Starts about, 1825 is the first vision, or 1820. And then, I would say with 1805, with Joseph Smith's birth, there's so many miracles and I'm sure angelic ministration that had gone on that is not quite as documented as it could be, I'm sure, to begin this restoration phase here. But yeah, so we're talking about the latter days, post 1800, 1830, the establishment of the church. And then I've just got kind of a historical context going into here. So leading into the restoration, you had these different main eras of religious reformation. You had in the late 1300s, after the Dark Ages. And look, even on my map here, and here I go jumping everywhere. But I went back and traced all of the kingship lines of Great Britain and England, going back to the Roman conquest. Just tying together again that this is the same beast of Daniel's visions, the same man, figure, the Gentile kingdoms, where Rome is dominating the world for a time, at Christ's birth in the meridian. And then it breaks down eventually and is spread out upon all the world. And we're all just a remnant of these Gentile dynasties, right? It's still, this is why it's a mystery Babylon. It's a repeat of all these patterns of antiquity and leading up to our days, but under the guise of some new enlightenment. We think that we've now had the truth given to us and bestowed upon us to think in things, when it was just like a constriction of knowledge after an outpouring of the Son of God himself at the meridian, right? You had the very avatar of truth and righteousness come to the earth and born in flesh and rejected by his people. And then the devil wants to make the world all, to his own liking and kingdoms, and wearing Christianity as a skin suit through his conquests, all through the Dark Ages here, through these 2 days, 2,000 years amongst the Gentiles of their reign. And then it fractures into these, I guess you could see them as like the toes, right? All of these different branches that we'll explore are like the toes of the Roman Empire. But mainly I've kind of tracked the British crown, all leading through modern history, getting up to the 1700s, where you have the birth and advent of America here in the 1776. And so, all this stuff is like my own other studies that I've been going along. Like this is the Ezra's Eagle prophecy, and showing all the presidents in line. The assassinations are obviously X'd out, and all of them I would say are dubious, are suspicious, are worthy of scrutiny in terms of understanding that from the inception of our great country and the establishment of the Constitution and our Bill of Rights and all of the things that make America wonderful, there has been a movement to subvert it, to wrestle it back under this monarchical, oligarchical, nasty control of a mystery Babylon, of secret combinations. So yeah, while we have freedoms and things, it's great, but it's been a battle, and I would say we almost lost it with the Civil War. Luckily, we were blessed and things held together. And then it was in the 1900s here, as we see with the Ezra Ziegel prophecy, that we became captured almost entirely from the finances in 1913 with the Federal Reserve Act, income tax, and all that sneaking in. And then you had the monopoly puppet, Woodrow Wilson, who was essentially a puppet man for all of these robber barons of the 1800s. Your Andrew Carnegie's. Of what industry was he? He was steel, I believe, right? And the railroads. John D. Rockefeller, who this book that we're reading is going to reference a lot, because he was written about in articles in the 1900s as like the most powerful man in America, essentially. Like outside of the executive, outside of government, the man with influence was Mr. Rockefeller. But this is oil, right? So when we will hear reference the Seven Sisters, this is Rockefeller Family Oil Company, Standard Oil, when it was forced to be split and broken up due to monopoly laws after the 1900s. But as this is splitting, this is when they're making their move with the Federal Reserve to enslave America, essentially, and cut the fat off the top with the Federal Reserve and their infinite money lich now with speculative currencies and whatnot. And it's funny, I recall, I think the church put out a statement around 1913, around the same time, against speculative endeavors. And I think it was in reference to the dream mine. Maybe somebody can correct me, or if you guys know or understand or have heard of that story, the dream mine in Salem, Utah, that creepy one that the guy built and tried to get everybody to invest in, and it was almost like a pyramid scheme. It was denounced by James E. Talmage, I believe. I think he went and inspected it, said it wasn't a viable mine, the dream mine. Let me just look it up real quick. Dream mine, Salem, Utah, just to check myself. Just go to the Wikipedia. Yeah, okay. The Dream Mine is an unproductive underground mine in Salem, Utah, built by John Hiram Coyle in the 1890s. Dude, look at that mustache. Slick. And incorporated in 1909. So Coyle prophesied the mine would would provide financial support for members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints just before the second coming of Jesus Christ. His prophecies were controversial among leaders of the LDS Church, who excommunicated him in 1948. So many years later. But I think in 1913, the church came out directly against him. I'm not familiar with this Wikipedia page, but I do know there was like here we go. The BYU McKay Library Declarations. I think it was a statement, maybe. Not. This is a cool website. If you don't know, maybe I'll throw it in the chat if you want to use it. It's just a BYU archive website that has all the declarations, proclamations, statements, and different writings that the church has put out, like officially. Let me find the chat. If anybody's here. There's that. But let's see. Here, A Warning Voice, 1913. So yeah, Taft succeeded by President Woodrow Wilson. Wilson proposed his election marked a clear change of government in which American system would re-examine its previous industrial, materialistically, economically driven tendencies, so big monopolies, the industrial boom, and pursue a more moral, human-centered course. Okay, for sure, that was part of it. Here it is, the mine. Okay, occasionally members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints became involved in what archaeologist and anthropologist Ian Barber has called sacred mining enterprises. Sacred mining enterprises. Endeavors with significant spiritual overtones. In fact, I think my grandpa, on my mom's side, was involved in some of these in the later 1900s. And it wasn't so much as sold as like a sacred mining enterprise. It's more like a get-rich-quick scheme thing. It involved to strike off the veneer of some spirituality, and was just like, all right, this is how we're going to get rich, guys. And it was all about mining operations and stuff among Latter-day Saints. So interesting. But so sacred mining enterprises, endeavors with significant spiritual overtones. Barber identifies several such ventures in operation during the latter part of the 19th century and into the early part of the 20th century. So we're talking late 1800s into the 1900s. Most notable of these was John Coyle's Dream Mine near Salem, Utah, so called because of Coyle's claims that angelic visitations and other spiritual manifestations had induced him to engage in the mining endeavor. In June 1913, here it is, James Talmage, Elder James Talmage of the Quorum of the 12 Apostles and a professional mining consultant, traveled to Salem to inspect the mine. He pronounced it absolutely without promise of success. While the church allowed its members to pursue professional, vocational, and economic ventures of their choice, Coyle appeared to use his position as a counselor in the bishopric and later as bishop to induce members of his congregation to buy stock in the Coyle Mining Company. This appears to be the immediate precursor to the initial issuance of the 1913 statement on August 2nd. On July 2nd, 1914, another Deseret News article reported that the Dream Mine was about to shut down, although it was not. However, the article claimed that, look, this is already propaganda, even amongst the Deseret News. It's like we shouldn't be surprised when we see that the liberal media has entirely, taken over our media arms, even within the church, which is disappointing. But you kind of have to do with what you can while you're in Egypt until Moses comes. So, however, the article claimed that another mine in another part of Utah being worked on similar, another part of Utah being worked on similar principles was starting up. Therefore, the 1913 statement by the First Presidency was reprinted. It is difficult to know whether the other mine being referred to was the Humbug mine being run rather successfully by Jesse Knight, or perhaps early reports of the Syndicate mine, so it's just some other mines. A statement issued by the members of the First Presidency, which consisted at this time of Joseph F. Smith, Anthon H. Lund, and Charles W. Penrose. As was mentioned already, Talmage had also likely counseled with the First Presidency about the matter. They denounced fake mining schemes and any other fanciful schemes to make money for the alleged purpose of redeeming Zion or providing means for the salvation of the dead or other seemingly worthy objects. So again, there was this air of speculative means, wearing the skin suit of spiritualism kind of thing that they were denouncing. But I just think the timing of it too, with the introduction of the Federal Reserve, ultimately this would create our economy into like more of a speculative economy more than anything else, and speculating on what? War, and we're profiteering. That's how we move into the military industrial complex and stocks and bonds, and then totally moving to a fiat currency. And now we have, crypto and basically online gambling with our digital currencies and things, how it's just blossomed into this unstable environment. So it was all kind of foreseen is what we're saying. And this is what you would expect before a major like financial collapse, that you would see a flipping of the tables, metaphorically speaking, before Christ's second coming, where you want to have the situation set up for a financial collapse if you see all these other signs, culminating, building. So that's what this is anyways. I don't know where I was with the Dream Mine there. But Federal Reserve, the robber barons, all the capture of America happens here and moves forward with Ezra Ziegel going. And pretty soon we'll see, how this is going to evolve, because it gets complicated here moving forward. So yeah, that's what this part is. And it's funny, in my first stream here on Twitch, when I played this section before, I think I had played it in when I had gone to the other tab that these were on, it like muted this when I played the Eisenhower address out, saying it was copyright, and it shouldn't be. But it was just interesting that was like not allowed to be played. So anyways, but leading up to the Restoration, you've got the roots of Reformation that get sown with early figures like John Wycliffe or Jan Hus, who points forward to Martin Luther. The Gutenberg Press, the printing of materials in 1440 begins, the promulgation or the printing and sending out of the Bible and all kinds of other texts. And this is really what begins this revival of knowledge and understanding and wisdom and, treating things, just allowing the masses to have access to that, because it had been restricted to the initiated of, upper classes during the Dark Ages. So with it being spread amongst everyone else, you have this new pool of ideas. And so everybody's thinking they're creating something new under the sun with the Enlightenment, when it's really just a return to what had been constricted under Roman hegemony, like evil oligarchical rule over the world for the Dark Ages. I mean, and that's an oversimplification, trust me. I mean, if we zoom into any one of these 100-year spans or 10-year spans, it's going to be a tree just as complicated as you see superficially here with a lot of this stuff. So I'm not trying to poo-poo like history. I'm saying the further we dig into this, the more we could uncover. But I'm just kind of pointing out the general ideas of stuff and the things that I already knew. Like, these are names that I went to college understanding, like studying about and stuff. So these are ones that I knew, would be touch points for me personally. But imagine this. This is what's happening religiously, theologically. Then you have in 1611, this is when the King James Version is printed by, who do we have? King James down here. And he's the first of the Stuart family. And now this King James, funny enough, I put a post out on Christmas, remember, the 25th of December. And that's a little rhyme paying homage to remember, the 5th of November, which was the gunpowder plot, which involves King James. The brief account of the bloody and futile define laid against the king, his lords and common of parliament, and of a happy deliverance by divine power. So this is what happened. There was, in 1605, I'll just read what I have here. In earlier centuries, often called the gunpowder treason plot, or the Jesuit treason, was an unsuccessful attempt of regicide against King James of Scotland, and by a group of English Roman Catholics led by this guy, who considered their actions attempted tyrannicide, blah, blah, blah. Okay, so they wanted to kill him. Anyways, they were going to blow up the House of Lords during the state opening of Parliament. So imagine the State of the Union address. Like, this is the same pattern that they were to blow up the House of Lords on Tuesday, the 5th of November, 1605. So V for Vendetta, the movie, again, it's all this plot, essentially, fictionalized and restated and remolded for propaganda for our era. But this is, anyways, thought that was interesting. 1607, too, this is around the same time, the gunpowder plot and James, and here the printing of the first Bible. This is when you have the Seeds of America settlement of Jamestown, right, in Virginia. It's our first English settlement in America set up. So this is the seedbed. All of this made the restoration possible. All of this was necessary for Joseph Smith to come in with religious freedom under the banner of America and freedom, right? And the Constitution and the freedom of religion, for the restoration to blossom, for a foundation stone to be set, even though, we had an exodus. We were chased from New York, where Joseph Smith was born, all the way across to the Mountain West and the desert that nobody wanted, and we set up the foundation stone of Zion. And then our temples and our government and everything and our charity has gone to all the world over. But I think it's just beautiful looking at this all as it happens. Now, the occult side of things here is that theologically, all this is happening. Philosophically, you have the Enlightenment taking flight, especially in the late 1600s through the 1700s, during the spawning of America. So many geniuses that were there, the Benjamin Franklins and George Washingtons and Thomas Jeffersons, and all of these amazing souls that were sent to the earth were sent during this Enlightenment, a true era of thought and ideological mixing, right, of understanding. And we'll get to it, but I have Adam Weishaupt, who's the founder of the Order of the Illuminati of Bavaria. We'll get into that. But these are some of the leading, I would say, prophets or philosophers or figureheads of secret societies and movements that in the underworld, in the occult, were moving and shaping the upper layers of society. Okay? All of the undergirding building that happened during the industrial era, during the establishment of America, the Restoration phase, this whole industrial revolution was done under the back of brotherhoods, of secret societies and fraternal orders, right? Freemasons. All of these orders were like the underlying structure of society. We see it with the Zion Society and the priesthood, right? And our hierarchy and organization and fraternal bonds and things that of service and charity and looking after each other and pitting or pooling resources, helping the poor. It's the same order. This is why Joseph Smith called Freemasonry like a fallen priesthood. And Freemasonry, in fact, the first Grand Lodge in England is set up in 1717. So you have it. I mean, they'll claim to go back to Solomon and Solomon's Temple, and perhaps there are certain orders that could claim to go back there. But you're gonna have to piggyback through all kinds of secret societies or different named groups and organizations and kind of tie the dots. But officially, your first lodge is 1717, and then you have great thinkers, Enlightenist thinkers, revolutionaries is maybe a better word to describe them, like Adam Weishaupt, who advocate for revolution, and they're sick of the monarchical rule that up to this point had been dominating the world, right? So this is where you have the birth and spawning of ideas that would be the seedbed of Karl Marx and all these other prophets of this dispensation of deceit. to develop a fake millennium, a fake Zion, a fake united order in socialism and communism, ultimately ending in the end goal of tyranny, like a one world government ruled by these guys, the smart guys. They want to be the elites. And if we're looking at in a truth, the dispensation of the fullness of times is the opposite end, the righteous exercise of that same pattern almost, with Christ being the king and the children of Israel essentially being his elite class, the rulers and reigners, the managers of the rest of the world under his political kingdom. So while you'll have a lot of truthers that will look at conspiracy from the angle that this whole idea that the Enlightenment Illuminists bring forward, it's actually a parallel of the doctrine that we teach in terms of the kingdom and government of God in the Restoration. But that complicates things when you're not able to parse that as somebody without the gospel, without the understanding of the Restoration, or the Book of Mormon, or all the fruits that the prophets of the dispensation of the fullness of times leave us to have tangibly, to test, to eat. Nothing secret or hidden about them. And there they are, plain to see that it ties this story going all the way back, as far back as we want to go, even before the Gentiles. We have history, right? And we understand nations and rises. And in fact, our model nations and states are ones that have been taken up into the bosom of God, up into Zion. We know our model nation state is the city of Enoch, the city of Salem, Zion, the kingdom of God, being of one heart and of one mind with the divine creator. That sounds like the government I'd like, please. And that's essentially the difference here. But it's sneaky in that the rest of the world just sees everything as like, oh, we're just a mishmash of accidents, and it's amazing we all work together, blah, blah, blah. But nothing is by accident. And this is what we'll explore here as we read, that it's not a matter of the accident. It's everybody wants you to believe it's an accidental history, that everything just happened by accident. It's just bad luck that all these things happen. When the truth is, it's a conspiratorial history. Not conspiracy theory history, like it's conspiracy fact history, that men have conspired through all ages and all times, even going back to the pre-mortal existence, if we want to talk about the council in heaven, and the same game plan being run by Lucifer and his followers to remove the agency, forcefully enforce their ways, and basically have the glory or the cream of the crop of everyone else at their expense. It's, again, just a repeat, but looking at different scales and layers and how it's all the same. So that's just kind of a grand tour of what I've got up here. We'll I'm sure, visit more of them as we introduce to groups like the Fabian Society and other socialist movements and stuff like that. They're all going to be brought up in the book, but just wanted to kind of show the board. This is what we're working with. Got all the Latter-day Prophets, 17, up to President Nelson. Got some icons at specific dates that are important for me, touch points with like the conference center, building of it in 2000, symbol on the roof, then the new symbol of the church here, the family proclamation. I need to put up the proclamation to Christ, or to the world, probably the priesthood statement. All these things I can put on here as well, just to show other touch points that kind of will go in comparison to all this carnage and terror and horror and destruction that we'll see in our dive into Mystery Babylon, which can be depressing. But he's like, why do you look at all that conspiracy stuff? It's just dark and depressing, and you see the control over all of us. Like, why? Oh, it's just, and it's like, no, you have to understand, like, there's a right hand and there's a left hand. And if you ignore the left hand, you never know who your enemy is. You never know what's before you, and you're always susceptible to their deception. So it's like, understand the game plan. And if you understand yours well enough, you should be able to catch the patterns in the false versions. And that's kind of the exercise we're doing. So enough yapping from me. Let's see here. Let's see. Dustin, I've seen the William Tyndale quote twice in the last 24 hours. Then it must be something for you to ponder a bit more. What was my quote? Did I have the William Tyndale one here? Where's Mr. Tyndale? Mm-hmm. Cool thing about this mirror too is I can. You have spelled it wrong. Well, tell me what you're referencing, because I don't remember what quote I even said, or that popped up. But glad we could help, Dustin. All right, let's jump into it. We'll start reading here. And again, previous episodes, you can find all the previous streams, research streams, on my YouTube channel. That's where I upload these. They disappear, I guess, after a certain amount of days here on Twitch, so they don't go back. But I'm keeping them all on my YouTube. So we did read the prologue last episode, so we'll jump into part 1, and we'll get into these chapters 1 and 2 if we can get through them. But here we go. Part 1. Introduction to Part 1. When the text for None Dare Call It Conspiracy was completed it was December of 1971. Mr. Nixon was sitting comfortably in the White House. The Vietnam War was being wound down by an accord. Here, and just to, I'm going to put the framing up for it. All right here. Back in this thing. So we're talking about Nixon, the Vietnam War is being wound down. The accord, what is it? What's it called? The Geneva Accord, maybe? Is that what it is? I'm pretty sure it's Geneva Accord. If that's the 75 one. 54, maybe not. Oh, man. I guess there are a bunch of different Geneva Accords. I'm not sure which one he's referring to, but... okay, Vietnam War was being wound down by an accord. Inflation had been harnessed, and these are all in quotes, thanks to the wage and price controls that Nixon imposed in August of the same year. And the president was riding high and looking forward to the campaign of 1972. Watergate was known only as a posh condominium, and this is all foreshadowing, if you're not getting it, that 1971, all these things hadn't happened yet, that Watergate and Nixon's ouster, and Spiro Agnew, he's the vice president. This is what I have up here, vice president of Richard Nixon. So that's who they're referencing here. So let me just read it. Watergate was known only as a posh condominium and office complex in Washington, D.C. Spiro Agnew was knocking the nattering nabobs of negatism. Let's look that word up. Nabob, historical, a Muslim official or governor under the Mughal Empire. Okay, there you go. A person of conspicuous wealth or high status. That's probably what it is. So Spiro Agnew is knocking the nattering nabobs of negatism. Nabobs. Gerald Ford's only claims to fame were that he had been appointed to the Warren Commission. And the Warren Commission, if you don't know what that is, that's the commission in 1963 put together to investigate the assassination of President Kennedy. Totally corrupt commission. Maybe we'll dive into that. There it says here, which had investigated President Kennedy's death as safely as possible. And he had been the second banana at the popular Ev and Jerry show when Senate Minority Leader Everett Dirksen would drag out House Minority Leader Jerry for weekly press conferences. This would be the same thing as like people today, like Jerry Nadler or Mitch McConnell or somebody coming to the top and like yelling at in front of the microphone. This is what he's referencing during their era. The press showed up to hear Dirksen. George McGovern was talking about running for president, but nobody took it seriously except George himself and Jane Fonda. I looked up George McGovern because I didn't know who he was. George McGovern was an American politician and a member of the Democratic Party, best known for his unsuccessful presidential campaign in 1972 against Richard Nixon. He served as a U.S. Senator from South Dakota from 63 to 81 and was a prominent advocate for liberal policies, including civil rights, anti-war efforts, and social justice initiatives. So this is McGovern. A suspected communist, eh? And then Jimmy Carter, who, it says? All these people weren't even known back when the first book was written and released, this introduction. Ronald Reagan was a governor of California and as such was disappointing his loyalists by appointments and policy seemingly at odds with his campaign promises. Elsewhere in the world, the situation was as follows. The Shah was in firm control of the Persian Gulf. The idea that if Vietnam fell to the Viet Cong, it would set the stage for the entire collapse of Southeast Asia to communism was ridiculed as the domino theory. And what he's getting at here is that this happened. Vietnam fell and went communist, and a lot of the nations all around it went communist. It was worst case scenario that in the day of this book was being ridiculed and called the domino theory. Like, oh, you're just being dumb. They're like the replacement theory today would be one that would be analogous, where everybody's like, oh, that's not what it means. That's not what it is. But clearly we see that these politicians and special interest people are pumping in immigration intentionally to pop up their election numbers, to pop up their census numbers, to destabilize our economy. There's vested interest in this. Like, this is the game they've been playing us. They've been pumping us up like an airbag and popping it occasionally to reset the board. Okay, so Rhodesia was not yet Zimbabwe. Angola and Mozambique were still Portuguese colonial holdings. Gaddafi had recently been an enlisted nobody in the Libyan army, and who knew anything about Libya? Well, Bunker Hunt did, whose oil and equipment holdings were expropriated by the Libyans the following year. And the West government and the Seven Sister oil companies, that's what we're talking about, Rockefeller, he's pulling in like these known insiders, collaborators into this timeline of like, hey, look at all this stuff that hasn't yet happened that proves our theory, is essentially what this whole introduction is doing. It's saying all these things in the 70s and 80s, These have happened. They flipped just like we said they would when everybody made fun of us when this book was released in 1971. That's kind of the idea of these things. So if you don't get all of the references, that's okay. I don't either. Some of them, I get the general idea, though. Like, I know the Sandinistas. I think those were the rebels, like the communist rebels in Nicaragua. Member of a left-wing Nicaraguan, yes, good guess, Leland, political organization, the Sandinista National Liberation Front. This would be like the Viet Cong in Vietnam. Like everywhere there's this battle between communism and fascism, or communism and something else. Like it's always the same. It's always the same intelligence companies, the military-industrial complex that is propping them up against each other, like backing both sides. The two arms of the same person playing two different puppets. Yeah, so that's who the Sandinistas were. The Contra is like, so, and if somebody said Granada, we conjured up images of a Spanish love song. There you go, through mind control. Mao was still doing his best to toss the Chinese people, body, and soul back to the Dark Ages. Members of the Gang of Four, Mao was, again, a communist, Marxist-inspired dictator. Members of the Gang of Four were not in prison. They were the wardens. The Soviet Union had just suffered its umpteenth crop failure, but had firm control over its Eastern European satellites, and the world was going to be a much safer place thanks to the SALT Treaty. Maybe that's why the Reagan administration still honors it. Years after it legally lapsed, the Soviets, of course, never honored it. So again, I don't pretend to understand all the details there. That would be something we could dig into if we wanted, but I'm going to skip that. Let's see. Oil crisis. What oil crisis? With oil at $4 a barrel, the only energy crisis in August of 1971 was the crisis felt by the owner of your friendly local service station. Remember when they used to offer service because we could still afford it? 22 cents? This just makes me sick because you know what gas is now. And then Nixon's price freeze locked him in. It says gold at 100 per ounce? Impossible. I wouldn't want to live in a world like that, said Keynesian economist Paul Samuelson, with gold at $35. No wonder he later won the Nobel Prize in economics. Too bad he didn't put up the prize money in gold. So he's just, again, pointing out contradictions between things. Interest rates at 20%? You got to be kidding. Blah, blah, blah. I'm going to skip all these. Yes, it all seems so very long ago until you say it out loud. 1971. In the span of time for record albums, it hardly qualifies as a golden oldie. In less than 15 years, the whole world has been tossed upside down and then back again. And yet, when we look beyond the headlines, it is as the French have said for centuries. The more things change, the more they remain the same. During the intervening years, I went from a conservative young idealist who thought he knew how the world worked to an investment banker and deal doer who found out firsthand. In these past 14 years, I have traveled in most regions of the world. I have sat in boardrooms of some of the very banks and multinational corporations mentioned in the original book. And I've had an opportunity to see up close and personal some of the very people and situations that Gary Allen and I could only speculate about before. And, of course, during all this time, I have been repeatedly asked, do you still believe what you wrote in None Dare Call It Conspiracy? My answer every time has been yes, even more now than before. And this is Leland making a side note here, that this is exactly the feeling that I get as I dig into conspiracy stuff from this prophetic perspective. The more I look at it, the more I'm convinced that tying it to prophecy is the only way to go. There's no other way to look at it. It is for this very reason that the format of this book is what it is. The arguments for the existence of a conspiracy are stronger today than they have ever been, especially when we lay them alongside of what was said and written before. Therefore, chapter 1 through 7 are going to remain the same as in None Dare Call It Conspiracy. The bracketed updates are new, and so are chapters 8 through 13, plus the various appendices. It has often been said that the best way to value what anybody says or writes is to look back at what he has had to say in the past. So it is with apologies that I say to you now, gentle reader. It is without apologies that I say to you now, gentle reader. Check the record. I'll live with your decision. Then again, so will you, maybe for the rest of your life. Whoa! I don't appreciate that threat. No, but this is again, looking back 15 years after the original book, saying, hey, I'm more convinced now than ever, and here's the evidence why, and look at our trajectory moving forward. So I would say, how far, like that was 85 when this was written, and now here we are, 15, 25, 35. Oh man, I can't count. Yeah, 35 years later. 35 years later, basically. No, more than that. 39. Almost 40 years later. And it's even more obvious, like these points that we'll see have played out and are continuing to play out before us. So, all right, before we move on, let's see. He says, Dustin says in chat, he says he looks forward to a farm boy being able to know more than the Pope. Amen. Okay, yeah. I noted that while you were talking about the King James Bible. Gotcha. Do you agree with the general characterization of Nixon as a Rockefeller Republican? Yeah, I think all Republicans were subject to Rockefeller's stink, to be honest. Like, yeah, but you know what? Nixon's a special case because he fought against his handlers essentially, and I think maybe he was just too aloof and clumsy and didn't want to go with all the program, and so he was more of a trouble to everybody than not. So they kind of ushered him out, is what I see. He was just kind of like maybe it was his personality. I don't know enough. Like, I'm not a Nixon scholar to have like the characterization though that he was a Rockefeller puppet. Yeah, I think all of these guys were paying homage to the big names that everybody talks about and pretends like wasn't happening, behind the scenes, that they were pushing the buttons financially for everything. But yeah, we'll read about that because in this book, I think they'll even talk specifically about the things Nixon did, or especially the things Jimmy Carter did. I know that he's for sure a Rockefeller. Well, he wasn't a Republican, was he? No, Democrat for sure. Yeah, but the same thing. Like the Rockefellers and how they play the presidential left-right game here between Democrats, Republicans, whether it's the DNC they're funding or the RNC or whatever psycho wings or attaché groups that they create that are like subverting them. It's the same game being played globally by the Rothschilds or other like central banker global interest groups with kingdoms, leveraging one kingdom versus the other. So it's just like we see the micro scale in our presidency of the macro game being played on the grand chessboard, as it's called, the grand strategy board of world politics. So it's just like a little fractal. So yeah, I don't know. I think all of these guys are sleazebags, to be honest. Like even Kennedy, even all of them, all the way up to present day. Like they're all sleazebags. Just like I would say that if we were going through the Babylonian kings or the pharaohs of Egypt, like, oh, maybe there's a good guy there who threw a bone to us Israelites every once in a while, us true Israelites, right? Like, but everybody else is just like, yeah, you know what? The true king, y'all killed him. Y'all killed him in 1844, and I got this red line right through it where this happened to remind me that this is the date that the blood of prophets spills on this American land. And so this is kind of the way I see it. Like, I don't play the left-right politics so much in terms of like, I have to be right about who's a true conservative or who's a true this or that. I know they play the language game where it doesn't matter if you think you're a true conservative or not. They're going to change the definition of conservatism. It's continually shifting on the pole left or right or whatever direction that your nation requires them to shift it, socially, politically, ideologically, all of it, economically. So it's a good question. I'll think about it. I think as we read, we'll get some more insight into that. Chapter 1. Don't confuse me with facts. And again, this is all like facetious. When I listen to the audiobook a lot, and the guy that reads the audiobook, he's kind of obnoxious with it. Don't confuse me with facts. Most of us have had the experience, either as parents or youngsters, of trying to discover the hidden picture within another picture. It's like magic eye. Usually you're shown a landscape with trees, bushes, flowers, and other bits of nature. The caption reads something like this: concealed somewhere in this picture is a donkey pulling a cart with a boy in it. Can you find them? Try as you might, usually you could not find the hidden picture until you turn the page further back in the magazine, which would reveal how cleverly the artist had hidden it from us. Now, if we study the landscape, we realize that the whole picture was painted in such a way as to conceal the real picture within. And once we see the real picture, it stands out like the proverbial painful digit. Meaning once you see it, you can't unsee it. And this is what you'll hear with people who are awakening. I'm putting up my finger quotes. Everybody who thinks they're awakening. It's like once you start to see one anomaly, you can't unsee it. Especially if you're trying to make sense of your like if you think your worldview is making sense of everything, when something sticks out like that proverbial painful digit, like, ow, that hurts, right? Like, what is that? You can't stop noticing it. That's the whole idea of the red pill. Like, there's no going back. You take the blue pill, you just ignore it. Nope. You put your head in the sand like an ostrich, and you wake up and you believe whatever fairy tale you want to believe. Like, you want to believe that there aren't conspiracies happening? Oh, great. Yeah, then you're another proud proponent of the accidental theory of history. Everything just happens by accident. Go back to sleep. Continuing, says, we believe the picture painters of mass media are artfully creating landscapes for us which deliberately hide the real picture. In this book, we will show you how to discover the hidden picture in the landscapes presented to us daily through newspapers, radio, and television. Once you can see through the camouflage, you will see the donkey, the cart, and the boy who have been there all along. Millions, again, they're saying, we want to give you principles so that you can see through propaganda. That's the idea, okay? Millions of Americans are concerned and frustrated over mishappenings in our nation. They feel that something is wrong, drastically wrong, but because of the picture painters, they can't quite put their fingers on it. Now, again, this just blows me away that this is written in 70s, the 80s. So these guys get a lot of pushback that we don't necessarily get now in 2025, where fake news for the last 8 years has been something that has broken through the social zeitgeist, right? Like, we understand propaganda, we understand the news is fake, we understand the CIA's influence. So it's like that. You don't have to convince people a lot of this whole argument. So you gotta have to bear with it as you read it. But to me, it's a testament to how far we've come in the last 30, 40 years. That this is the situation that it is. I hope that made sense. Maybe you're one of those persons that you feel something's wrong. Something is bugging you. You aren't sure what. We keep electing new presidents who seemingly promise faithfully to halt the worldwide communist advance. Or we could say terrorist advance. Just replace terrorist with something else. The worldwide capitalist advance, the worldwide socialist advance. It doesn't matter, right? They promise to do one thing, but they continue to go in the same direction that their military-industrial complex wants them to go in. Just think about that. Last 20 years. Like, they're talking about communist here because that's what's relevant to them during the Cold War. And this is what everybody dismisses this book and Ezra Taft Benson's warnings as. It's like, oh, it was only relevant to the Cold Era. You're dismissing the entire thesis and idea because you're presentism-ising it. Presentism-ising. No, that is not a word. You get what I mean. You're applying presentism when it shouldn't be. You're like putting it in this capsule that, no, his counsel only related to these things. When, as we read this text, they're pointing out this isn't an ideology about Cold War or only communist advance, but conspiracy advance. That behind the communists, behind the socialists, behind the fascists, behind the capitalists, behind the monopolies, behind the big banks, there are conspirators, a secret combination. That's exactly what the Book of Mormon warned us of and said, hey, amongst you, the Gentiles, there will be this secret combination that seeks world dominance. That's exactly what this book is describing, okay? So don't come at me with, oh, it's a Cold War book and the frenzied mind of Ezra Taft Benson, he just couldn't get out. You know, he lived in the government and he just really was so political and wanted to bring his politics. It's like you're not seeing the bigger Zion fight here, the temple doctrines that are like associated so directly to this. The killing of Joseph Smith and the establishment of the Council of 50. Like, so much evidence points to you can't remove and separate politics and religion and theology. So talking about Ezra Taft Benson's politics for getting in the way of his theology, like, you're talking about a prophet of God who sees all things. Everybody wants to say you can see around corners, but not Ezra Taft Benson. So that tweet that I put out recently, like, got most likes that I've gotten out of a lot of things lately. So it's just like, this is the truth. He pointed plainly to the conspiracy behind this, not the era that he was just a part of. But that, as prophets do, they point to the underlying bigger layers and structures. Because what are they fixated on? They're fixated on Jesus Christ, on the fulfilling of his promises to gather scattered Israel, to bring the earth into a paradisical millennial state, to eliminate poverty, to eliminate war, right? That's what we're expecting, and that's what we see this conflict rising to. There's going to be a head. There's going to be a climax. I think we're experiencing it. It's like in slow motion. We're experiencing the climax, and it's just, we're going to, maybe when we pass on or whenever, we'll look back and see that we were riding the very tip of the wave as things were changing, and they are. So to me, it's beautiful. I think it's awesome. It's like frustrating when you see everybody else kind of tunnel vision into where we are. They don't see the bigger picture zooming out. They're like, no, all of this makes sense. All the prophets were right. Like, you don't have to lean out or pick and choose which prophets you need to really take seriously. All of them were pointing at the same thing. There's no position stronger. So it's like nobody's compelling to me that wants to restrict my vision. Dustin says, as above, so below. Wait, your use of accidental history just made me think of something. As above, so below. The moving of chess pieces is an evil imitation of what God does. And despite what the cabal does, our faith gives us hope that he is still a million steps ahead of them. Yeah. We're just seeing the pieces play out. If we know the end of the game, if we're taking this all as the grand chessboard, and we know the end of the game is that the bad guys don't win, even though it might look like they do, it might get dire where we've only got a queen and a pawn left or something, or a king and a pawn left. But we're going to see our pawn turn into a multiplicity of things or something. It's going to turn into a Jesus piece. And it'll wreck the board, right? Or the whole board's going to transfigure, and it'll be according to the rules. Something's going to happen that the evil chess movers aren't predicting or thinking. Yes, I think you're right, Dustin. He's so far ahead of them. In fact, like, this was all anticipated, that even the prophets we're talking about way back here, Adam to Enoch to Noah to Abraham, like they all saw our day. They saw what was going to happen and how we would be delivered. Even Moses is a type. The deliverance of Israel out of Egypt by grand miracle, plagues, catastrophe, all of it is an archetype, a type of the very millennium, right? And the same thing at the coming in on the Americas to the Joseph half. Same thing. The disturbances of the land, the upheavals, and then a Zion society for 300, 400 years is how long they kept it. And we know we'll keep it all over the globe for 1,000 years. So it's going to be a little different, though. Our environment will not just change locally, but universally. So let's get back to reading. So we keep electing new presidents who seemingly promise faithfully to halt the worldwide communistic advance, to put the blocks to extravagant government spending, to douse the tea of inflation, to put economy on an even keel, reverse the trend which is turning the country into a moral sewer, and toss the criminals into a hoosgow where they belong. Like, this is all of MAGA and America First from 2016 moving on. That was their message. It was all of this. It was literally this regurgitated. So this is like nothing new under the sun, guys. This is the same John Birch movement, just repackaged, and it went a lot farther as a catapult this time. And now it's going to go be projected into the office, and prophecy and common sense would say that the people in power who have been moving the conspiracy of history for generations and centuries, they're going to have to make a move, or they're going to be dealing with a decades-long setback to their master grand chess plan. So this is where, like, to me, there's no entertaining alternatives where, like, we just float into happiness now. There's going to be a revival era for many, many years. If they do, there will be a rug pull. There will be a collapse of all nations. It's prophesied. So it's like, I'd rather it get done sooner than later. So I think I get a bit zealous when I'm like, oh, no, it's going to happen. It better happen now. Let's go. Like, I'm ready. I'm ready to use my priesthood more physically. I'm ready for it. But I think a lot of people are comfortable. I'm comfortable in a lot of aspects too. And so I'm also grateful that it isn't happening. There's more of a time, a more period of grace, of understanding, of mercy. More people are eager to learn, and I want them to have more time. I want to have more time. Okay. So blah, blah, blah. All this is happening. No matter who's in office, nothing happens. It says each new administration, whether it be Republican or Democrat, continues the same basic policies of the previous administration, which it had so thoroughly denounced during the election campaign. It is considered poor form. Like, I'm just thinking, I lived through the Clinton to Bush to Obama. Like, that describes that to the T. And this was after this was written, after all of this, right? And I watched it. I experienced that growing up, where it was like nothing really changed. They were all part of the same team. Okay. It's considered poor form to mention this, but it is nonetheless true. Is there plausible reason to explain why this happens? We are not supposed to think so. We're supposed to think that it's all accidental and coincidental, and that therefore there's nothing we can do about it. FDR once said, in politics, nothing happens by accident. If it happens, you can bet it was planned that way. Well, he was in a good position to know, especially given our Ezra's Eagle context of his position as numero uno in terms of CFR control, right here. Well, I guess Hoover would have been, but FDR would have been the long feather. My bad. He would have definitely known, right? Like, I've actually been reading some other work too that he might have had a change of heart later on his campaign, seeing the direction of the conspiracy and how overpowering it was becoming. Like, what it evolved into by the time Eisenhower was terrified of it and leaving office. I think he was getting a glimpse of it and was murdered. That would be my I would say, it says he died of a stroke or a hemorrhage and things like that. But I think there's enough evidence to revisit that story, especially if we start to uncover this greater web and network of conspiracy. It starts to make a lot of sense that a lot of these presidents who died mysteriously in office had interestingly opposed certain power structures that were kind of no-nos. So it's just I'm a pattern recognition guy. And so these things are like bright lights, shining, blinking. I can't stop looking at them. These are the proverbial painful digits in my mind when you look at these things. It's like there's a correlation that can be found here. And as soon as we dig up enough information, I think it will be obvious. And I know Matthew Arrett is one scholar that I know is aware of this conspiratorial, occult underbelly to geopolitics and grand strategy. But he thinks the church is an enemy and part of the occult strategies, which is sad. But I also wholly recognize that him and his wife are woefully ignorant when it comes to our doctrine, our history, or anything about us. And so they're just kind of seeing things that are anomalies in terms of like our doctrines about second coming and Zion and like one world government type stuff. And so because of its similarities to what you see in the New World Order ideologies and the theosophical ideologies, which are adjacent, I would say theosophy, and I don't have anything marked for it yet. Theosophy would be late 1800, like it's the gap between enlightenment and secularism, like materialism, and an old traditional religion like Christianity. Like if you go full materialism and you take all the spirituality out of it, there's a gap. And you've got to have some type of religious structure. I mean, well, you see that with all atheists. They become basically religious to their atheist prophets with their own doctrines. Like it just is self-organizes that way. So there's this gap, this like air gap that forms when you try to eliminate all of the spirituality from your understanding. That's kind of what materialism does, like the extreme forms of it. And so the bridge between secular materialism, that is like the elite occult ideology of the Enlightenment, I would say like the Adam Weishaupt, the Illuminist ideas, right? It is reborn in theosophy, where you have a syncretic nature to it, where it's trying to bridge and bring all religions together and downplay the old traditions and reform new mythologies, essentially. So theosophy, I see it as like the leech. It's the cult initiation for the elite class into like this international view of enlightenment, of reshaping societies, of coming together as one, like a false Zion is what I see like the undergirding ideas behind theosophy and stuff. We can get into that because I think it's extremely relevant to where the Communist League and Fabian socialism, especially, like where they're going overtly political and doing things. You have theosophy on the religious anti-clerical side of things working its magic against established religious orders and things like that. So its job is like trying to overwhelm by presenting itself as massively aware of things that your old traditions and old elders weren't aware of. And so how do you deal with this? See, our system of thinking incorporates it all, and yours isn't even allowed to look at it. But that's the whole idea of it. It's an outgrowth, I think, of, again, this restricting we saw during the Dark Ages, where everything was restricted, even what you could read or believe. And then when you have it all just like revealed, like ta-da, especially with the advent of the internet and stuff, like post-2000 here, internet kids and the disconnect they have versus older generations, it's the availability of information that confuses the organization of it. It's the availability of information, the abundance of it, that confuses the proper organization of it. Unless you've got a measuring line, unless you've got a measuring tool, a plumb line. And for us, that's the word of God. That's the gospel. That's the doctrine. That's the doctrine and covenants. Like all that is our measuring line, our rod, right? To keep us on the path to the tree of life and righteous government versus the path to the floating building, which is foundationless government, which will collapse and is going to collapse. It's foundationless. Okay. There we go. Tying it back all the time. Making random tangents I don't need. We believe that many of the major world events that are shaping our destinies occur because somebody or somebodies have planned them that way. If we were merely dealing with the law of averages, half of the events affecting our nation's well-being should be for America or good for America. If we were dealing with mere incompetence, our leaders should occasionally make a mistake in our favor. We shall attempt to prove that we are not really dealing with a coincidence or stupidity, but with planning and brilliance. This small book deals with that planning and brilliance and how it has shaped the foreign and domestic policies of the last 6 administrations. We hope it will explain matters which have up to now seemed inexplicable, that it will bring into sharp focus images which have been obscured by the landscape painters of the mass media. I want to impress this on everyone's mind who's listening and whoever will. This is the thesis that they're pushing. They're not just pushing a Cold War thing. Like this is, he's saying the last 6 administrations, and I'm saying it's longer than that. It goes back. How many would be 6 from the Nixon? It'd be 1 or 4. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So they're talking back to FDR. Talking about he would know. I would say it's back to Hoover and the collapse and the Great Depression and all of this. Like this is all manufactured poverty, ignorance, and disease. PID, as they describe in this book. Okay. Those who believe that major world events result from planning are laughed at for believing in the conspiracy theory of history. Of course, no one in this modern day and age really believes in the conspiracy theory of history, except those who have taken the time to study the subject. I love that. It's so true. It's like everybody's like, oh no, conspiracy is for simple-minded folk. It's for the gullible folk. I've heard like well-educated PhD nerds that work at universities, have university jobs, say that. Well, conspiracy theories are for the simple people, the simple-minded people. And it's just not, it's idiocy to think of that way, especially looking back at history as a collective, that conspiracy has shaped all of history. And to be like, no, conspiracy theory today is just for the dummies. It's like, yeah. So it's just either it's obvious or you're stubborn about it and in denial of history. Just say it. Just say you deny history and today things are different. Just say it out loud. See how that feels. Look in the mirror and say that. When you think about it, there are really only two theories of history. Either things happen by accident, neither planned nor caused by anybody, or they happen because they are planned and somebody causes them to happen. Now, which is more scientific, my friends? Cause and effect or randomness all the time? Randomness, right? They want you to think that randomness is the result of everything all the time. And that's why they push these ideas that focus on randomness, survival of the fittest, and all these dumb ideas that reinforce this intellectual mishap here at the very foundation of things. In reality, it is the accidental theory of history preached to in the unhallowed halls of ivy, which should be ridiculed. Otherwise, why does every recent administration make the same mistakes as the previous ones? Why do they repeat the errors of the past which produce inflation, depressions, and war? Why does our State Department stumble from one communist-aiding blunder to another? If you believe it's all an accident or the result of mysterious and unexplainable tides of history, you will be regarded as an intellectual who understands that we live in a complex world. If you believe that something like 32,496 consecutive coincidences over the past 40 years stretches the law of averages a bit, you're a kook. Why is it that virtually all reputable scholars and mass media columnists and commentators reject the cause and effect or conspiratorial theory of history? I like how he's bringing more names in for it. So we're talking about conspiracy, the history of conspiracy, or the conspiratorial history. It's cause and effect history is the way you can describe it. That things happen because there is a cause and an effect. Primarily, most scholars, they follow the crowd in the academic world, just as most women follow fashions. To buck the tide means social and professional ostracism. The same is true of the mass media. While professors and pontificators profess to be tolerant and broad-minded, in practice, it's strictly a one-way street, with all the traffic flowing left. A Maoist, who's a communist, can be tolerated by liberals of Ivory Towerland, or by the establishment's media pundits, but to be a conservative, and a conservative who propounds a conspiratorial view, is absolutely verboten, unallowed, not allowed, forbidden. Better you should be a drunk at a national WCTU convention. I don't know what that is. Not worth looking it up, but I get it. A convention you shouldn't be drunk at. Secondly, probably a Christian convention. Secondly, these people have over the years acquired a strong vested emotional interest in their own errors. Their intellects and egos are totally committed to the accidental theory. Most people are highly reluctant to admit that they have been conned or have shown poor judgment. To inspect the evidence, so again, I see this a lot. I have to tell myself this when I'm encountering people who like pull off the mask and reveal themselves as having fallen hook, line, and sinker for communist, socialist, anti Ezra Taft Benson type stances, especially the ones that are like, well, other apostles disagreed with him. Other apostles, wanted to censure him. Oh, didn't you know that this happened? And it's like, well, can we talk about these issues that I'm talking about here, that the books are talking about, that Ezra Taft Benson was pointing at when he's tying these to eternal doctrines like agency and things like that? Like, do you want to have that conversation, or are we just going to run around the bush with it? Because every person I've ever run into runs around the bush, the mulberry bush. The monkey chased the weasel. Okay, let's see. So most people are highly reluctant to admit that they have been conned or have shown poor judgment, especially if you have to admit that the weird rapper, esoteric guy on Twitter is the one that might be right, and your intellect is perhaps very tiny. So, okay, I'm sorry, that was prideful. Lord, forgive me. Just kidding. It says, to inspect the evidence of the existence of a conspiracy guiding our political destiny from behind the scenes would force many of these people to repudiate a lifetime of accumulated opinions. It takes a person with strong character, indeed, to face the facts and admit he has been wrong, even if it was because it was uninformed. I think our prophet, with his inviting everybody to revisit their spiritual foundations is kind of given a free pass, saying, hey guys, repent. We can do better, be better. Check your foundations, focus on the temple, on Christ, and everything else should flow from there. So he's given us the answer in my mind. And what I present in my Cosmism Manifesto is that very thing. That putting our thoughts, every thought, trying to control every thought into the obedience of Christ, or at least understanding Christ, his doctrine, the church, the position that we're in, our mission, keeping that all present always is the key. And when you put other things like opinions maybe you learned growing up that don't quite fit on the tree of life higher than your priority to keep everything in line with the tree of life, well, then you're going to have conflicts. And you're going to get in fights with people online because you think you want to argue about how capitalism is evil and the root of all evil, and exactly not the United Order or what Joseph Smith. Yeah, exactly. It's not. In fact, they killed Joseph Smith. Thank you. And they chased us west. Thank you. And they wouldn't let us live the way that we wanted to live. Thank you. We couldn't live the United Order. Thank you. We also couldn't live polygamy. Thank you. We also couldn't live the way that we wanted to live anywhere we want to live. And even now, they won't call us Christian. Okay, so thank you. Thank you. Very obvious. Better calm down. Just start reading again. All right. So why is that virtually all reputable? Wait, I said that. To buck the tide means they have to be ostracized. I read that too. Here. It takes a person with strong character indeed to face the facts and admit he has been wrong, even if it was because he was uninformed. Such was the case with the author of this book. It was only because he set out to prove the conservative anti-communists wrong that he happened to end up writing this book. His initial reaction to the conservative point of view was one of suspicion and hostility. And it was only after many months of intensive research that he had to admit that he had been conned. Politicians and intellectuals are attracted to the concept that events are propelled by some mysterious tide of history or happen by accident. By this reasoning, they hope to escape the blame when things go wrong. Now, I don't know if that's the case, but that's definitely an accusation he's making here. I think a lot of them are just caught up in their own ego, the kids that were picked on maybe in school, or the cousin that was picked on or something. And now that they've got their PhD and they're making money and work at MIT and, they've grown up into adults and are making money and think that they've got status in credentialism or whatever it might be, they're some of the most stuck up. I mean, just saying. This is not the way to go. The way to go is to seek God first and let all of the other blessings of intellect and everything flow from there. So anyways, politicians and intellectuals are attracted to the concept that events are propelled by some mysterious tide of history. I read that. Most intellectuals, pseudo and otherwise, deal with the conspiratorial theory of history simply by ignoring it. And this is probably one of the most frustrating things for me out there, is that there are so many people that they don't just deal with the conspiratorial theory of history by ignoring it. They don't even deal with cosmism or anything else or any other layer that I want to talk about or bring to the table as evidence of why my testimony is so strong and why I don't have to deal with your dumb syllogisms or rational logical arguments or any of that stuff, because I've got this witness of prophets that goes so much deeper to layers that people won't even acknowledge exist. In fact, they ignore them, just like this. So not only do they ignore the conspiratorial theory of history and everything by, just pretending it doesn't exist, but many other layers that I think are available to us in the gospel and having the fullness of it are just ignored. And I think Peter lamented that, saying that many people are willfully ignorant of things in the last days, lustfully chasing their own kaleidoscopes. They never attempt to refute the evidence. It can't be refuted. If and when the silent treatment doesn't work, these objective scholars and mass media opinion molders resort to personal attacks, ridicule, and satire. The personal attacks tend to divert attention from the facts which an author or speaker is trying to expose. The idea, then, I think the most, you've seen this happen recently, I would just say, he's in 1985, and anybody who's an anti-communist would have been labeled the conspiracy wacko, the kook, right? Who is it today that gets labeled the conspiracy wacko, the kook? Who is it that gets leveled personal attacks at them before you even understand what it is they're actually, the evidence that they're trying to put forward? Just think of what groups of people out there, what whole swaths of stereotypes are being ridiculed in this very same way today in your day. How can you apply that? So the personal attacks, they tend to divert attention from the facts which an author or speaker is trying to expose. The idea is to force the person exposing the conspiracy to stop the exposure and spend his time and effort defending himself. Now, one example is the church, obviously. You have so many people that want to attack Joseph Smith as a pedophile, as a this, he's a con man, he's a liar, but they don't want to refute the evidence, the fruits. They don't. They just want to go straight to character attacks and ignore any of the other documented evidence and go straight to the speculative barbs. However, the most effective weapons used against the conspiratorial theory of history are ridicule and satire. These extremely potent weapons can be cleverly used to avoid any honest attempt at refuting the facts. After all, nobody likes to be made fun of. Rather than be ridiculed, most people will keep quiet. And this subject certainly does lend itself to ridicule and satire. Yeah, you'll definitely find yourself in the loser bucket when you're outed by everybody as the crazy conspiracy theorist in the family, right? So, for instance, our man from the halls of poison ivy, and that's a clever play on word if you didn't get it, might say to the effect, in a scoffing, arrogant tone, I suppose you believe every liberal professor gets a telegram each morning from conspiracy headquarters containing his orders for the day's brainwashing of his students. Now, some conspiratorialists do indeed overdraw the picture by expanding the conspiracy from a small clique, which it is, to include every local knee-jerk liberal activist and government bureaucrat. Or, because of racial or religious bigotry, they will take small fragments of legitimate evidence and expand them into a conclusion that will support their particular prejudice. An example, the conspiracy is totally Jewish, or Catholic, or Masonic. These people do not help to expose the conspiracy, but sadly play into the hands of those who want the public to believe that all conspiratorialists are screwballs. Okay, so here's a direct refutation to something that when I posted this just a couple weeks ago, I had somebody want to make a post and say, like, no, that book is all about claiming that the conspiracy is about the Jews. That just right here, we're not even in chapter 1. Like this is, we're 3 pages into chapter 1. And here it's telling us that that's not the case here. So it's like, these are people that are just repeating what they've heard from somebody. They're repeating stereotypes. They're not people who are actively learning. And it's sad because a lot of them are like my elders. They're people that are way older than me that I would really expect to have some help from on this, like a hand up, like, hey, high five, let me help you out here. It's not always the case. So these people don't help to expose the conspiracy, but sadly play into the hands of those who want the public to believe that all conspiratorialists are screwballs. This is happening today amongst America First, MAGA movements. It's been happening ever since Donald Trump took the stage, or any populist tries to step forward. He gets attached, and every negative influence gets leached onto him and soaked onto him. It's like, oh, this is what he is. This is what they are. This is what they are. They want you to believe all, like, a plethora of things. And so it just muddies the water. Anyways, you have a lot of that going on today where everybody wants to say, it's all about the Jews. It's all about the Masons. It's all about the this or that. It's not. It's much more organized behind the scenes than that. Those are all just like means to an end. Now, intellectuals are fond of mouthing cliches, like I was talking about before. With fascism and socialism and capitalisms and all these isms. They're ideologies. They're just tools in a toolbox for the conspirators. Okay, that's the way to look at all of these other clubs. Whether it's the Jesuits or this or that or this secret group or the Illuminati, they're all just boxes, okay? Boxes that are used and walked through and put together by secret combinations, by conspiratorial, power-hungry, evil people. Intellectuals are fond of mouthing cliches like, the conspiracy theory is often tempting, however, it is overly simplistic. To ascribe absolutely everything that happens to the machinations of a small group of power-hungry conspirators is overly simplistic. But, in our opinion, nothing is more simplistic than doggedly holding on to the accidental view of major world events. In most cases, liberals simply accuse all those who discuss the conspiracy of being paranoid. Ah, you right-wingers, they say, rustling every bush, kicking over every rock, looking for imaginary boogeymen. Then comes the coup de grace, labeling the conspiratorial theory as the devil theory of history. Now, I'll admit, I've never heard that in my life. This does not apply to me in 2024 today. But again, just reading it, because obviously this must have been common talking points in the 80s and 70s. The liberals love that one. Even though it is an empty phrase, it sounds so sophisticated. With the leaders of the academic and communications world assuming this sneering attitude towards the conspiratorial, or cause and effect theory of history, it is not surprising that millions of innocent and well-meaning people, in a natural desire not to appear naive, assume the attitudes and repeat the cliches of the opinion makers. These persons, in their attempt to appear sophisticated, assume their mentor's smug air of superiority, even though they themselves have not spent 5 minutes in study on the subject of international conspiracy. And that's what I was talking about with, I have family members that are exactly like that. That they couldn't engage me on any of this stuff we're connecting dots to, or deny that the dots are there, the patterns are there. but they just want to shrug it off as overly simplistic and you're gullible and blah, blah, blah. And because it's off-putting to look like you're somebody who espouses those ideas in the circles they run in. The accidentalists would have us believe that ascribing any of our problems to planning is simplistic, and all our problems are caused by poverty, ignorance, and disease, hereinafter abbreviated as PID, poverty, ignorance, disease. And this, I think, goes back to like societal controls and manipulations, like a la Thomas Malthus. Might be somebody we want to include. I'm not sure if he's specifically brought up in this book or not. Perhaps just in passing as like mentioning somebody's views as Malthusian. But Thomas Malthus is somebody who, when I talk about population control through statistics, numbers, and I think this very thing, like cultivating disease, what's it called? Eugenicism, that kind of stuff, like shaping society to your whims, and which pairs perfectly or greatly with Darwinism. And this is why these prophets of this dispensation of deceit put all these things kind of in the same boat and use it as their cudgel. Okay. Let's see. I just lost my space. And I keep resizing the window here, and then it changes my spot on here, and I get lost. So sorry about that. It's like my ADD or something. Let's see. Okay, here we are. They ignore the fact, so the intellectuals and accidentalists, they ignore the fact that organized conspirators use PID, real and imagined, as an excuse to build a jail for us all. And that's what I'm talking about, where they use poverty, ignorance, disease. They force this on certain groups. They create the war scenario that brings the disease and the poverty, you know what I mean? Or they restrict what can be taught to increase the ignorance. Like this are just levers of control. Most of the world has been in PID since time immemorial, and it takes incredibly superficial thinking to ascribe the ricocheting of the United States government from one disaster to another over the past 30 years to PID. Accidentalists ignore the fact that some of the more advanced nations in the world have been captured by communists. Czechoslovakia was one of the world's most modern industrial nations, and Cuba had the second highest per capita income of any nation in Central and South America. It is not true, however, to state that there are no members of the intellectual elite who subscribe to the conspiratorial theory of history. For example, there is Professor Carroll Quigley of the Foreign Service School at Georgetown University. Professor Quigley can hardly be accused of being a right-wing extremist. Those three words have been made inseparable by the mass media. Think about it. That still holds right today, that this is the same accusation being leveled against anybody who wants to like point a finger at the establishment. Dr. Quigley has all the liberal credentials, having taught at the liberal establishment's academic meccas of Princeton and Harvard. In his 1,350-page, 5-pound tome, Tragedy and Hope, Dr. Quigley reveals the existence of the conspiratorial network, which will be discussed in this book. The professor is not merely formulating a theory, but revealing this network's existence from first-hand experience. He also makes it clear that it is only the network's secrecy and not their goals to which he objects. Professor Quigley discloses, and then they quote him. I know of the operations of this network because I have studied it for 20 years and was permitted for 2 years in the early 1960s to examine its papers and secret records. Interesting. I have no aversion to it or to most of its aims and have, for much of my life, been close to it and to many of its instruments. I have objected, both in the past and recently, to a few of its policies, but in general, my chief difference of opinion is that it wishes to remain unknown. And I believe its role in history is significant enough to be known. So, I just want to point it out what he's doing here. He's talking about, all right, everybody wants to say everything was accidental in terms of history. Yet, all of these nations, post-Enlightenment, have been falling and captured by communism. Even right through, supposedly, our industrial and military strong era, right? They still continue to fall to communist ideas and socialist ideas. So, he's saying, now, it's not true that there aren't any academics who don't believe in conspiracy history, because here we have Professor Carroll Quigley, who wrote a book, Tragedy and Hope. And if you look this book up, let's see if we can find it on just an image so you can see what the cover looks like. Tragedy and Hope. Tragedy and Hope. Quigley. I think seeing the image of it, if you haven't before. Okay. A History of the World in Our Time by Carroll Quigley. Tragedy and Hope. It's got a clock going to midnight. So it's just interesting. Okay. So Tragedy and Hope, Tragedy and Hope, Tragedy and Hope. It's a long book. You can read it if you like. I'm sure you can pull out a lot of great nuggets. It's directly from the sources they're saying here. I've never read it full on myself. I'd use it more as a reference book more than anything, not something I'm like dying to read. But maybe we could if people want that. So, anyways, let's see. There I go. I resized it again and now I'm lost. Now, we agree that its role in history does deserve to be known. That is why we have written this book. However, we most emphatically disagree with this network's aim, which the professor describes as nothing less than to create a world system of financial control in private hands able to dominate the political system of each country and the economy of the world as a whole. That's a quote from Quigley's book. Nothing less than to create a world system of financial control in private hands able to dominate the political system of each country and the economy of the world as a whole. That's world governance, especially through financial mechanisms, right? That's what Quigley's describing. And I would say that maybe even what he's looking at is still just one arm of the octopus or the hydra, or maybe he saw part of the head. But there are so many other arms and tendrils and tools, as he described it. What did he say? Instruments. He used that word. I have been close up to many of its instruments, right? I would say that could be individuals, but that could also be groups, organizations, institutions, nonprofits, think tanks. All of those are the instruments of the conspiracy, right? Of the secret combination. That's the way that I see this all. You got to see all of it as connected, but it's compartmentalized, right? Like not everybody's aware of how everybody's attached to each other. It's like a good military operation or a development project where you don't want everybody to know what they're doing. You compartmentalize it. So everybody's working and thinks that, in their own world, they have an understanding of things, but they're not seeing how everything else is being managed and connected together as a body. Now, continuing, it says, in other words, this power mad clique wants to control and rule the world. Even more frightening, they want total control over all individual actions. As Professor Quigley observes, quote, his, or the individual's, freedom and choice will be controlled within very narrow alternatives by the fact that he will be numbered from birth and followed, as a number, through his educational training, his required military or other public service, his tax contributions, his health and medical requirements, and his final retirement and death benefits. It wants control over all natural resources, business, banking, and transportation by controlling the governments of the world. In order to accomplish these aims, the conspirators have had no qualms about fomenting wars, depressions, and hatred. They want a monopoly which would eliminate all competitors and destroy the free enterprise system. And Professor Quigley of Harvard, Princeton, and Georgetown, he approves. Professor Quigley is not the only academic who is aware of the existence of a clique of self-perpetuating conspirators, secret combination, whom we shall call insiders. And again, we can expand that vocabulary to whatever words you want to use today. Like it could be deep state. It could be the cabal. All those words fit. Now it's like who's directly in it and who's not. That's where it can get fuzzy. But seeing the ideological aims and fruits are very clear and obvious. Other honest scholars finding the same individuals at the scenes of disastrous political fires over and over again have concluded that there is obviously an organization of pyromaniacs at work in the world. But these intellectually honest scholars realize that if they challenged the insiders head on, their careers would be destroyed. The author knows these men exist because he has been in contact with some of them. So the author is claiming that there are people in the academic world, intellectual world, that know that if they call this out, that their lives would be threatened, basically, or their careers destroyed. Their livelihoods threatened. Now, there are also religious leaders who are aware of the existence of this conspiracy. And we can point directly to Taft Benson, like all of our prophets. Joseph Smith, they knew about it. He knew about this. The enemy is combined, right? In secret chambers, they plot your destruction through process of time, Joseph was told. In a UPI story dated December 27th, 1965, Father Pedro Arrupe, head of the Jesuit order of the Roman Catholic Church, made the following charges during his remarks to the Ecumenical Council. This godless society operates in an extremely efficient manner, at least in its higher levels of leadership. It makes use of every possible means at its disposal, be they scientific, technical, social, or economic. It follows a perfectly mapped out strategy. It holds almost complete sway in international organizations, in financial circles, in the field of mass communications, press, cinema, radio, and television. So that's, again, whether you want to take Father Pedro Arrupe in 1965's word or not, but there's just another outside point, a finger pointing from another religion, right? Another order. Again, it would be ignorant to say that all Jesuits are in on Mystery Babylon and the secret combination to dominate the world. It's not true, right? Just like all Freemasons aren't, just like all Jews aren't, just like all Mormons aren't, right? It's the same idea. So you have a faithful Jesuit calling out his people saying, hey, we know that this thing exists and it's dangerous. Like, we should do something about it. There are a number of problems to be overcome in convincing a person of the possible existence of a conspiratorial clique of insiders who from the very highest levels manipulate government policy. In this case, truth is really stranger than fiction. We are dealing with history's greatest whodunit, a mystery thriller which puts Earl Stanley Gardner to shame. If you love a mystery, you'll be fascinated with the study of the operations of the insiders. If you do study this network, of which Professor Quigley speaks, you will find that what had at first seemed incredible not only exists, but heavily influences our lives. It must be remembered that the first job of any conspiracy, whether it be in politics, crime, or within a business office, is to convince everyone else that no conspiracy exists. The conspirators' success will be determined largely by their ability to do this. That the elite of the academic world and mass communications media always poo-poo the existence of the insiders merely serves to camouflage their operations. These artists hide the boy, the cart, and the donkey. And that's a reference back to the beginning of this chapter, talking about the magic eye, seeing the picture within the picture that's intentionally hidden. And so he's just circling back to say, like, yeah, if you're talking about a secret society or a secret combination, isn't it supposed to be secret, Leland? Well, yeah, but when you're thousands of years old, hundreds of years old, and decades old with like generations now that are very clumsily pulling levers and, you know, managing the Emerald Palace carnival face with the Wizard of Oz behind the screen is what I was getting at, with Toto pulling the screen and you see who's pulling the levers behind it. Like, there's a very clumsy deception going on now by these same managers of what's being described here. Okay, so it should be obvious to see that, like, they've tried to hide this for a long time. I think especially with the advent of the internet, things have accelerated exponentially to the point that it's absurd. That's why it feels like clown world today, where like the news is moving so fast and cycles of how things get out there and how opinions change and flip-flopping and stuff. It's like it's becoming absurd because of the unbottlenecking of information. Like I talked about earlier, where we had the Dark Ages to the Enlightenment and the Reformation and the access of information complicating the organization of it. We're having the same problem here in our digital technology age. And the previous propaganda mechanisms, the tools, the instruments, the ones that worked before, they're not cutting it now. And so this is why you see the building of, you know, post, especially Donald Trump, post 2012 really is what it is, when they amended the ability for the American government to propagandize things like their own people. It started there, where these tools of deception, they've always been used on the American people, but they just like overtly were pointed back at populism, at Donald Trump, spying on them. Like the stuff you could get into with Watergate and why Nixon was ousted and humiliated. All of that is put to shame with what happened in the last decade of politics, modern politics, with Donald Trump and Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton and Bill Clinton and all of this transition here that I don't have all the other presidents yet lined up. But it just continues. So to me, like, again, seeing everything in macro, in the big picture, it really is just more witness that this makes sense. This is the way to go. This is the way to understand things, is this conspiratorial view of history. There's no other way that explains things so coherently altogether. Okay, I got off track, though. It was a bottleneck of information and ideas, right? So probably at some time you have been involved with or had personal knowledge of some event which has been reported in the news. Perhaps it concerned an athletic event, an election, a committee, or your business. Did the report contain the real story, the story behind the story? Probably not. And for a variety of reasons, like the reporter had time and space problems, or there was a good chance the person involved deliberately did not reveal all the facts. Possibly the reporter's own prejudices governed what facts went into the story and which were deleted. Our point is that most people know from personal experience that a news story is often not the whole story. But many of us assume that our own case is unique when it is really typical. What is true about the reporting of local events is equally as true about the reporting of national and international events. And I'd say again, this is not a hard sell on us today, as we are very familiar with fake news, and that we should take all news reports with a grain of salt. Psychological problems are also involved in inducing people to look at the evidence concerning the insiders. People are usually comfortable with their old beliefs and conceptions. So when Columbus told people the world was a ball and not a pancake, they were highly upset. They were being asked to reject their way of thinking of a lifetime to adopt a whole new outlook. What he's getting at here, I'm just saying this is Leland, like, I understand this because I'm always trying to change worldviews. Like, that's, what is Leland offering? Like, when he puts himself out there on his online ministry, or what he's doing, like, what is he writing? What's the content he's creating? It's paradigm enhancing. It's vision widening. It's paradigm changing understandings. Like, hey, leave Babylon. Let's jump onto the rod of iron, like, wholeheartedly, like, with both hands. Come follow me. Like, it is a paradigm change. When you ask people to read the Book of Mormon and to pray about it, you're asking them to change their paradigm. Their entire worldview is going to change. So it's a hard sell. People, like it says here, are usually comfortable with their old beliefs and conceptions. So this is what we're dealing with too when we are trying to convince someone to look at the evidence concerning insiders or a deep state or a secret combination. They are being asked to reject their way of thinking of a lifetime and adopt a whole new outlook. The intellectuals of the day scoffed at Columbus, and people were afraid that they would lose social prestige if they listened to him. Many others did just not want to believe the world was round. It complicated too many things, and typical flat earthers had such a vested interest involving their own egos that they heaped abuse on Columbus for challenging their view of the universe. Don't confuse us with facts. Our minds are made up, they said. It's funny that flat earth is coming around again as a psyop. It's just funny. These same factors apply today because, like, he's including it in here to be like, look how outrageous they were when they thought about flat earth. And now we believe the news is fake, but we also believe the earth is flat again. So it's like, we think we're making it, and then the truther community gets rug pulled again by again, you're basing truth on relativity, on somebody who doesn't have a plumb line to priesthood authority, to ultimate truth, to revelation. Now, these same factors apply today because the establishment controls the media. Anyone exposing the insiders will be the recipient of a continuous fusillade of invective from newspapers, magazines, TV, and radio. In this manner, one is threatened with loss of social respectability if he dares broach the idea that there is an organization behind any of the problems currently racking America. Unfortunately, for many people, social status comes before intellectual honesty. Although they would never admit it, social position is more important to many people than is the survival of freedom in America. And that's sad because that's the case. A lot of people do not want to acknowledge these things. Now, if you ask these people which is more important, social respectability or saving their children from slavery, they're of course going to tell you the latter, saving their children from slavery. But their actions or lack of the same speak much louder than their words. People have an infinite capacity for rationalization when it comes to refusing to face the threat of America's survival. Deep down, these people are afraid that they may be laughed at if they take a stand, or may be denied an invitation to some social climbers cocktail party instead of getting mad at the insiders. These people actually get angry at those who are trying to save the country by exposing the conspirators. And I would say this is the crab in a bucket syndrome, right? Where you have everybody trying to climb out, and then you have these others who are mad at the crabs for climbing out of the bucket, trying to pull them back down. This happens in our church too, when you have ideas and people not wanting to look at things in a perhaps more faithful light than they want. And so they get mad. Now, one thing which makes it so hard for some socially minded people to assess the conspiratorial evidence objectively is that the conspirators come from the very highest social strata. They are immensely wealthy, highly educated, and extremely cultured. Many of them have lifelong reputations for philanthropy, like helping the poor and being charitable. Bill Gates comes to mind immediately when you hear the word philanthropy, for me, at least today, right? The desire to promote the welfare of others expressed by the generous donation of money to good causes. If you give enough money away, nobody will care like what you're doing behind their backs, right? Nobody enjoys being put in the position of accusing prominent people of conspiring to enslave their fellow Americans. But the facts are inescapable. Many business and professional people are particularly vulnerable to the "don't jeopardize your social respectability" pitch given by those who don't want the conspiracy exposed. The insiders know that if the business and professional community will not take a stand to save the private enterprise system, the socialism through which they intend to control the world will be inevitable. They believe that most business and professional men are too shallow and decadent, too status conscious, too tied up in the problems of their jobs and businesses to worry about what is going on in politics. These men are told that it might be bad for business or jeopardize their government contracts if they take a stand. They have been bribed into silence with their own tax monies. I think, too, just my mind goes to COVID and how this was exposed in terms of instead of an ability to stand up for what you know is obviously wrong or what your rights are, people were all too willing to shut up to get along and go along kind of thing, like to just keep things running, right? Like, and I think in certain situations, that's the safe play to make. Like, you got to do that if a lot of people are depending on you and you're kind of caught up in the waves of things. But if you're in a position to take a stand, you could have, even in small things. It didn't have to be about everything. But in the things that mattered, I think we'll still have lots of opportunity to do that. So I'm looking at it like it's a thing of the past, but it just came to my mind that that's kind of a manifestation of what he's describing here. We've kind of lived through recently. So we are hoping that the conspirators have underestimated the courage and patriotism remaining in the American people. We feel there are a sufficient number of you who are not mesmerized by the television set, who put God, family, and country above social status, who will band together to expose and destroy the conspiracy of the insiders. The philosopher Diogenes scoured the earth or the length and breadth of ancient Greece searching for an honest man. We are scouring the length and breadth of America in search of hundreds of thousands of intellectually honest men and women who are willing to investigate facts and come to logical conclusions, no matter how unpleasant those conclusions may be. So there you go. That's the introduction. Now here's the 1985 update. Unlike 1971, the American people now have an inherent distrust of the national news media. And well, they should. Time after time, we watch the handsome and mellow-voiced anchormen of NBC, CBS, and ABC trash the defenders of freedom and glorify the high priests of communist revolution. In the last 14 years, we have witnessed the demise of the following people: Nguyen Cao Kai of South Vietnam, Ian Smith of Rhodesia, General Somoza of Nicaragua, and the Shah of Iran. In every case, these men were replaced by overt communists, or in the case of Iran, a madman. At this very moment, we are watching the destruction of the anti-communist leadership in South Korea, Taiwan, El Salvador, Chile, South America, and the Philippines. If any of these governments fall, is there any doubt over their replacement? Meaning it'll be socialist, it'll be communist. The picture painting continues as freedom dies. Now, before Professor Quigley died, Gary Allen and I had the chance to debate him about the contents of his book, Tragedy and Hope. In the fall of 1972, None Dare was starting to generate heated debate, especially on some radio talk shows. In Salt Lake City, that's interesting, by the way, this was set up in Salt Lake City, an enterprising talk show host struck on the idea of bringing together the principal players, Abraham, Allen, and Quigley. Gary and I flew into Salt Lake City. We set up shop in the control booth of the radio station and waited for the telephone hookup to Professor Quigley in Washington, D.C. Once we got on the air, Quigley went crazy. He accused us of not only quoting him out of context, but fabricating statements out of whole cloth. One quote he denied was the one in the chapter above. In order to set the record straight, I flipped open the book to page 950 of his book and asked the moderator to read word for word what Quigley had written. He did, and the professor hung up. End of debate. As to the honest scholars who realized that if they challenged the insiders head on, their careers would be destroyed, there is no greater example than the case of Mr. Anthony Sutton. I first met Mr. Sutton when we were working on None Dare. He was a senior fellow at the Hoover Institution of Stanford University and had been working for some years on a 3-volume magnum opus called Western Technology and Soviet Economic Development. Sutton's access to State Department decimal files and other highly sensitive records produced results absolutely devastating to the insiders. He proved conclusively that Western technology and money had not only propped up the Soviets, but actually saved them from the disintegrating from within. His estimate of the 95% of all Soviet technology has been imported or stolen from the West. Thanks to the growing controversy surrounding our book, and because of the impeccable scholar, and what this is implying is, again, what we talked about with the same person playing two different puppets with the same arms, like 2 arms of the same person. This is what was being exposed by Anthony Sutton. And what happens? It says, thanks to the growing controversy surrounding our book, and because of the impeccable scholarship of his work, Sutton started to attract attention. As soon as this happened, the powers that be at Hoover Institution decided his services were no longer needed. So much for academic freedom. So much for intellectual honesty. So again, just a little update with a few more points that are like barbs to say, boom, here's how this really happened. This is what Carol Quigley wanted to deny what we had said, but when we quoted his words verbatim, he hung up. Like, it's very interesting. So, all right, give me 1 sec. I heard my wife come home, so I'm going to run and say hello real quick, put on some music for you, and then we'll get back into chapter 2 on socialism. I do want to get through this because I'm tired of reading through socialism. Last like week and a half, 2 weeks, I've just been re-listening to these sections. It's been good, but I'm ready to move on. Now let's just see. I want to find an instrumental that I've got here. No, it's not one. Let's see. Oh, this is not what I wanted either, but let's listen. Saga. This is a good one. Pretty sure it's instrumental. I just name them a lot of random things on my music projects until I release them, and then I'll usually put a more proper name to them. Now there's
I'm not alone on my journey to him. I have my friends and...
Okay. All right, well, this one has lyrics, so you get an extra bonus. I'll be right back.
I will try to become what you want me to be. Open my eyes, Father, help me to see. I will go, I will do everything that you say. I will stay on the covenant path. I will walk through the narrow way. I'm not alone on my journey to him. I have my friends and my foes. I can't return all alone back to him. Only with her can I go. Born of blood and flesh in the fall of 85. I was born again, a member when I symbolically died. Down into the waters like the Savior and the Lamb. Holy Spirit in the heart and now a son of the great that I am. I walk and breathe by God, pathways cleared by the iron rod. Born as a child in the body of the flesh with a heart full of blood and the questions of death. One for the body, one for the soul, and one came down from the throne to the coal. One came down for to open the scroll. The Son of God comes now from his treasures in trove. I will try to become what you want me to be. Open my eyes, Father, help me to see. I will go, I will do everything that you say. I will stay on the covenant path. I will walk through the narrow way. I'm not alone on my journey to him. I have my friends and my foes. I can't return all alone back to him. Only with her can I go.
I don't wanna fall, I don't wanna fail, I don't wanna forget, no, I don't wanna fail. I don't wanna get old, I don't wanna die, I don't wanna lose the ability to fly. I don't wanna sleep, nah, I don't wanna rest. I wanna battle with the morning stars best. I don't wanna risk this, miss this blessing. I don't want a body if it fails in the chest, oh listen.
Life through death, faith in Christ who paid the debt. Oft enticed and often tempted, oft forgiven when I've repented. Decisions that I've relented, often blessed and often mended, often lifted, arm extended. Why so many won't comprehend it? I will try to become what you want me to be. Open my eyes, Father, help me to see. I will go, I I will do everything that you say. I will stay on the covenant path. I will walk through the narrow way.
All right, I'm back. Everybody's good? We're good. I know I don't have a lot of people watching the stream. Those of you who have been watching, appreciate you. And those who watch on the replay, I also appreciate you. All right, we'll save this one for later. Give you guys a taste of... All this is like unreleased music. Might never release it. Who knows? But I got a lot of stuff that a few people hear, but I like to listen to a lot. Okay, moving on. And now, just kind of the recap for me. For that whole part one, don't confuse me with facts. It's just like presenting the whole thesis, essentially, that, well, part of the thesis, that we're not talking about, well, like we're talking about the conspiracy of history, like a bigger conspiracy than just one evil group in, in a smoke-filled room or something like that, but that it's a combination of interests who seek global domination, basically. So that's kind of the what I get from that. And then just talk about different ways to approach people, the different, what are they called? Objections to conspiratorial thought. A lot of bagging on the intellectuals, which I'm a fan of to a certain extent because they deserve it. But it's also, again, in prophecy where you have those who think they're learned and wise, when they're not. And that's exactly what we're talking about here, is people who refuse to like synthesize the most important layers of society, which to me would be connecting the dots between cause and effect in history and not just saying it's all random. Okay, so let's move on. Chapter 2, Socialism. Everyone knows that Adolf Hitler existed. Wait, the subheading for this is Royal Road to Power for the Super Rich. Everyone knows that Adolf Hitler existed. No one disputes that. The terror and destruction that this madman inflicted upon the world are universally recognized. Hitler came from a poor family which had absolutely no social position. He was a high school dropout and nobody ever accused him of being cultured. Yet, this man tried to conquer the world. During his early career, he sat in a cold garret and poured onto paper his ambitions to rule the world. We know that. You can read it. It's called Mein Kampf. Similarly, we know that a man named Vladimir Ilyich Lenin also existed. Like Hitler, Lenin did not spring from a family of social lions. The son of a petty bureaucrat, Lenin, who spent most of his adult life in poverty, has been responsible for the deaths of tens of millions of your fellow human beings and the enslavement of nearly a billion more. Like Hitler, Lenin sat up at night in a dank garret scheming how he could conquer the world. We know that too. Now, is it not theoretically possible that a billionaire could be sitting, not in a garret, but in a penthouse, in Manhattan or London or Paris, and dream the same dream as Lenin and Hitler? I hate this sentence, but I'm going to read it. It says, you will have to admit that this is theoretically possible. Because it annoys me when I listen to it on the book when it says, now isn't it possible that you could have a billionaire sitting around today doing the same things that Hitler was doing or Lenin was doing? Like, you have to admit it's possible. It's like, yes, obviously. I just hate that line. Julius Caesar, a wealthy aristocrat, did, and such a man might form an alliance or association with other like-minded men, might he not? Caesar did. These men would be superbly educated, command immense social prestige, and be able to pool astonishing amounts of money to carry out their purposes. These are advantages that Hitler and Lenin did not have. Now, this is making me think of one Elon Musk here, right? There's an interview, I couldn't pull it up because I don't know where it's from. I was listening to it. There was an interview with somebody who was one of the engineers, like one of his right-hand engineers at Tesla. And when they started to develop the robot technology, when they were going to make the bots, the droids for homes and stuff, he had this guy and some others on a team kind of develop like what it would look like, or how to make it happen. As soon as they had the plans for that and they showed it to Elon Musk, the chain of command, or the chain of supply and the manufacturing of it, like all of these things just fell into place because of Elon Musk and his money, his network, his ability to get things done, like with his many different companies that he runs, his ties to the Department of Defense. He's the #1 defense contractor in terms of putting satellites up, and who knows what he's digging underground. Like, things just happened when they decided they were going to happen. That's the point I'm trying to bring up. That this engineer said, we decided this is what the bots were going to look like and do, and like a process to manufacture something or to build an assembly line or to build just the logistics of getting it from point idea to point on the ground running and moving. Musk apparently, or Elon Musk, or somebody like that. I'm just pointing him out because he's exactly this, a wealthy aristocrat type person, right? Who has the means and money to make social influence a reality. And he's doing that. He's been doing that. You're watching it happen. And he's not alone. Like, we've got, again, Bill Gates or Jeff Bezos or any one of these guys you can put at and put him in this position and say, but right now Elon Musk is kind of the hot topic. So it's just interesting to me to see that he can do that with building robots, but people will deny or be brutish about thinking that somebody like that might exercise that same type of meticulous planning and wealth and resourcefulness. And they will scrutinize or laugh or reject the idea that somebody would apply it to nefarious plotting to take over the world type thing. That's I don't know. To me, it's just wild, because you'll sit and watch every stinking Marvel movie every movie of fiction you've ever enjoyed has a protagonist and an antagonist, and the antagonist wants to take over the world or the universe or the city or the town or the woman or something, right? It's always the same. And so to deny that it's happening in real time is literally the ostrich take. And it's just so lame. Okay. So these are the advantages that Hitler and Lenin did not have, like the astonishing amounts of money to carry out their purposes. So it is difficult for the average individual to fathom such perverted lust for power. And I admit that. Like, a lot of people just don't want to admit that evil exists in the ways that it can and does. The typical person of whatever nationality only wants success in his job and to be able to afford a reasonably high standard of living, complete with leisure and travel. He wants to provide for his family in sickness and in health, and to give his children a sound education. His ambition stops there. He has no desire to exercise power over others, to conquer other lands or peoples, to be a king. He wants to mind his own business and enjoy life, since he has no lust for power. It is difficult for him to imagine that there are others who march to a far different drum. But we must realize that there have been Hitlers and Lenins and Stalins and Caesars and Alexander the Greats throughout history. Why should we assume there are no such men today with perverted lusts for power? And if these men happen to be billionaires, is it not possible that they would use men like Hitler and Lenin as pawns to seize power for themselves? Indeed, difficult as this is to believe, such is the case. Like Columbus, we are faced with the task of convincing you that the world is not flat, as you have been led to believe all your life, but instead is round. We are going to present evidence that what you call communism is not run from Moscow or Peking. It is an arm of bigger conspiracy run from New York, London, and Paris. The men at the apex of this movement are not communists in the traditional sense of that term. They feel no loyalty to Moscow or Peking. They are only loyal to themselves and their undertaking. And these men certainly do not believe in the claptrap pseudo-philosophy of communism. They have no intention of dividing their wealth. Socialism is a philosophy which conspirators exploit, but in which only the naive believe. Just how finance capitalism is used as the anvil and communism as the hammer to conquer the world will be explained in this book. So there you have it again. A reiteration of the point I'm continuing to make over and over again. Communism, socialism, whatever ism, feminism, they're all just hammers, tools of these conspirators to turn governments into tyrannical situations, dictatorships that they can take over. The concept that communism is but an arm of a larger conspiracy has become increasingly apparent throughout the author's journalistic investigations. He has had the opportunity to review privately 4 retired officers who spent their careers high in military intelligence. Much of what the author knows, he learned from them. And the story is known to several thousand others. High military intelligence circles are well aware of this network. I think that's important to highlight there. High military intelligence circles are well aware of this network, because that would play out to what you see playing out today with the claims of certain intelligence agency or like a division of white hat versus black hat emerging on the surface today in what you see in the truther community, in the conspiracy community. You have kind of this coalescing of sides, essentially, where you have supposedly, again, allegedly high military intelligence white hats, people fighting against the secret combination or a push to globalism that are propping up the populist choices as of late. Like, that's the idea. Now, in addition, the author has interviewed 6 men who have spent considerable time as investigators for congressional committees. In 1953, one of these men, Norman Dodd, headed the Reese Committee's investigation of tax-free foundations. When Mr. Dodd began delving into the role of international high finance in the world revolutionary movement, the investigation was killed on orders from the Eisenhower-occupied White House. According to Mr. Dodd, it is permissible to investigate the radical bomb throwers in the streets, but when you began to trace their activities back to their origins in the legitimate world, the political iron curtain slams down. They don't want you to see who was funding those bombs. That's the idea. Because it was them. You can believe anything you want about communism except that it is a conspiracy run by men from the respectable world. People will often say to an active anti-communist, I can understand your concern with communism, but the idea that a communist conspiracy is making great inroads in the United States is absurd. Now, this is Leland. This whole next section about just this whole next direction, you'll feel it as absurd as I do, because I almost think today, like, no, this is not the same as today. Like, if you went and surveyed people today about communism, you'd have more people agree with it and say we should be communist than this book in 1985 presupposes. So listen. It says, people often say to an active anti-communist, I can understand your concern with communism, but the idea that a communist conspiracy is making great inroads in the United States is absurd. The American people are anti-communist. They're not about to buy communism. It's understandable to be concerned about communism in Africa or Asia or South America with their tremendous poverty, ignorance, and disease. But to be concerned about communism in the United States, where the vast majority of people have no sympathy with it whatsoever, is a misspent concern. Now, on the face of it, that is a very logical and plausible argument. The American people are indeed anti-communist. And this is where I'm saying, I don't know if we could say that like wholeheartedly now. Like, hopefully the majority still. Suppose you were to lay this book down right now, pick up a clipboard and head to the nearest shopping center to conduct a survey on Americans' attitudes about communism. Sir, you say to the first prospect you encounter, we would like to know if you are for or against communism. Most people would probably think you are putting them on. And if we stick to our survey, we would find that 99% of the people are anti-communist. I challenge those numbers today again. I think we should put it to the test. We probably would be hard put to find anybody who would take an affirmative stand for communism. So, on the surface, it appears that the charges made against anti-communists concerned with the internal threat of communism are valid. The American people are not pro-communist, but before our imaginary interview walks away in disgust with what he believes is a hokey survey, you add, sir, before you leave, there are a couple other questions I'd like to ask. You won't find these quite as so insulting or ludicrous. And what I'm saying is, like, today, this whole section is almost, like, inadequate. You have to rewrite it because you can expect to get pro-communist responses nowadays. I know. I have family members, direct family members, who support communism now. Like, it's not, maybe I'm a little skewed in that I do have that in my life, but I see it as... And when I went to university, you had whole classes of kids who were willing to try it the right way. You know what I mean? Like, it's the same concern that's being voiced here. It's under concern. It's being undervoiced is what I'm trying to say, is that they're underplaying it. It's a lot worse. Immediately, a whole new situation has developed. Rather than the near unanimity previously found against communism, we now have an incredible diversity of ideas. There are a multitude of opinions on what communism is. Some will say, oh yes, communism, well, that's a tyrannical band of socialism. Others will maintain, communism is what, as it was originally intended by Karl Marx, was a good idea, but it has never been practiced, and the Russians have loused it up. A more erudite type might proclaim, communism is simply a rebirth of Russian imperialism. But if perchance one of the men you asked to define communism happened to be a political science professor from the local college, he might well reply, you can't ask what is communism. No, that's a totally simplistic question about an extremely complex situation. You see, communism today, quite unlike the view held by the right-wing extremists in America, it's not an international monolithic movement. Rather, it's a polycentric, fragmented, nationalistic movement, deriving its character through the charismas of its various national leaders. Well, of course, there is the wielding of Hegelian dialectics, which is problem, reaction, solution, right? Where that's exactly what we see today with the Democrat, Republican, I'm a middle-of-the-road libertarian, like all of its manipulated dialectics. With Feuerbachian materialism. I think he's one of the guys that inspired Karl Marx with a very there is no spirituality, like everything's materialism, obviously. Anyways, so it says welding. It says, of course, there is a welding of Hegelian dialectics with Feuerbachian materialism held in common by the communist parties generally. It is monumental. It is a monumental oversimplification to ask, what is communism? Instead, you should ask, what is the communism of Mao Zedong? What is the communism of the late Ho Chi Minh, or Fidel Castro, or Marshal Tito? So he's saying, oh, it's more complex. You can't just ask, what is communism? So he's giving you like what answers you would get and pointing out that you're going to have a whole bunch of different ideas as to what even communism is. So like, how do you say you're anti-communist if you don't know what it is? That's what he's getting at. And that's what my observation today, 40 years in the future, is validating, saying this misunderstanding of what communism is or what socialism is has led us right into it. That not knowing or being aware of what these things are and what their aims or intents or applications have been, that we run the risk of being deceived by them and using them ourselves, on ourselves. So if you think we're being facetious here, you haven't talked to a political science professor lately. For the above is the prevailing view on our campuses, not to mention in our State Department. Whether you agree or disagree with any of these definitions, or, as may well be the case, you have one of your own. One thing is undeniable. No appreciable segment of the anti-communist American public can agree on what it is that they are against. Isn't that frightening? Here we have something that almost everybody agrees is bad, but we cannot agree on just what it is we are against. How would this look or work in a football game, for example? Can you imagine how effective the defense of a football team would be if the front four could not agree with the linebackers, who could not agree with the cornerbacks, who could not agree with the safety men, who could not agree with the assistant coaches, who could not agree with the head coach as to what kind of defense they should put up against the offense being presented? Yeah, the obvious result would be chaos. You could take a sandlot team and successfully pit them against the Green Bay Packers if the Packers couldn't agree on what it was they were opposing. That is academic. The first principle in any encounter, whether it be football or war, hot or cold, is know your enemy. The American people do not know their enemy. Consequently, it is not strange at all that there are, for 3 decades, have been watching one country, or that we have been for 3 decades watching one country of the world after another fall behind the communist curtain. And that's true. And I think if I have any data science or data visualization smart people, that would be a really cool data plot to visualize, is the acceptance of socialist, communist movements, ideas, parties in governments across the world from like 1875 maybe, or 1850, probably go back. Yeah, 1875 to present day, especially through the World War I, World War II era and the Cold War, where it's like, supposedly we were winning, there's nothing to worry about. To see like they're noting here, is it not strange at all that for 3 decades we have been watching one country of the world after another fall behind the communist curtain? And it was shortly after the first book was written that Vietnam went right back into communism and things were screwed up there. So anyways, in keeping with the fact that almost everybody seems to have his own definition of communism, we're going to give you ours. And then we will attempt to prove to you that it is the only valid one. So here's the definition. Communism: an international conspiratorial drive for power on the part of men in high places willing to use any means to bring about their desired aim. Global conquest. So if you could simplify it, what is communism? It's global conquest. That's it. You will notice that we did not mention Marx, Engels, Lenin, Trotsky, the bourgeoisie, proletariat, or dialectical materialism. This is exactly what we're talking about. Dialectical would be the Hegelian dialect and materialism, which is part of communist philosophy. The bourgeois and the proletariat are the two classes between the class struggle that they're always pitting against, or saying, one should have a violent revolution, and overthrow the other. That kind of thing. That's the whole call in the Communist Manifesto. Trotsky, Lenin, Engels, Marx, these are all the authors and contributors to expanding on the communist ideal. How to exercise it, how to make the plan work the best, kind of thing. So, like, he's not talking about the philosophy part of it, the exercising how to make it happen. We're just we're zooming out even more and saying, what is this? What is communism? It's global conquest at its root. It's just a tool, an instrument in their shed. We said nothing of the pseudo-economics or political philosophy of the communists. These are the techniques of communism and should not be confused with the communist conspiracy itself. We did call it an international conspiratorial drive for power. Unless we understand the conspiratorial nature of communism, we don't understand it at all. We will be eternally fixated at the Gus Hall level of communism, which is like repeating slogans about the middle class and down with capitalism and blah, blah, blah. Like if we're just arguing within the ideological confines of what is communism or how does it work better, blah, 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 like we're falling into the trap. That's the tool. That's the technique. So that's what he's saying. We will be eternally fixated at the Gus Hall level of communism. That's not where it's at, baby. See, I wonder if you highlight Gus Hall, if it'll give us a good definition. Gus Hall, I think he was a communist. I'd have to look it up. Actually, let's get a quick synopsis. Gus Hall. Gus Hall was an American activist who served as the general secretary of the Communist Party USA from 1959 to 2000. As a labor leader, Hall was closely associated with the so-called Little Steel strike, okay, blah, blah, blah. Generally taking an orthodox Marxist-Leninist stance and becoming a perennial candidate for candidate in the United States. All right, so let's say, here's what I'll do. Actually, I'll open it up over here. I'll get a little chat, show you how I might do a chat GPT, how I would answer it, or make the inquiry. So I'd say, what is meant by a Gus Hall level of understanding? So here it'll tell us, let's see. A Gus Hall level of understanding likely references Gus Hall, a longtime leader of the Communist Party, to imply a depth of knowledge or ideological commitment associated with his views. Gus Hall was known for his staunch support of Marxist-Leninist principles and his unwavering loyalty to the support or to the Soviet Union's interpretation of communism. His name in this context could mean one of two things, depending on the tone and context. Deep, unwavering commitment, which is not what we're talking about. So let's take this definition. A simplistic or dogmatic view. That fits the context of the book we're reading. Alternatively, it could imply a narrow or overly simplistic understanding, potentially poking fun at the rigid doctrinaire approach of that Hall and similar figures were sometimes criticized for. So yeah, that's what he's talking about. Gus Hall level communism is talking about the doctrines, the application of everything. This is the same, like the parallels to the dispensation of the fullness of times, and here you have the prophets of the dispensation of deceit working out doctrine amongst themselves, essentially. That's what Marx, Lenin, Trotsky, that's how you see this. So that's how I see this. That's how I'm suggesting we see this. So that's what this is kind of saying. Is that like they want to talk about it at a doctrinal level. When we're talking about zoom out at the macro level, it's global conquest. Like it's just a means. The doctrine doesn't really matter. It's just how do you make it look pretty? And I guess less dangerous to yourself. So it says, the way to bring down the wrath of the liberal press establishment or the professional liberals is to simply use the word conspiracy in relation to communism. We are not supposed to believe that communism is a political conspiracy. We can believe anything else we wish to about it. We can believe that it's brutal, tyrannical, evil, or even that it intends to bury us, and we will win the plaudits of the vast majority of American people. But don't ever, ever use the word conspiracy if you expect applause, for that is when the wrath of liberaldom will be unleashed against you. We are not disallowed from believing in all types of conspiracy, just modern political conspiracy. And isn't that so true? Like, and again, it just goes back to everybody's comfortable with conspiracy as the main theme in the plots of the movies and books and fiction that they consume all day, every day. Even in their soap operas, right? Like all of it. But when you want to apply that to the real world, it's impossible sometimes. We know that down through the annals of history, small groups of men have existed who have conspired to bring the reins of power into their hands. History books are full of their schemes. Even Life magazine believes in conspiracies like the Cosa Nostra, where men conspired to make money through crime. You may recall that Life did a series of articles on the testimony of Joseph Valachi before the McClellan Committee. Again, Valachi, whistleblower for the mafia, the McClellan Committee investigating some of these things. Congressional committee is what I would guess. There are some aspects of those revelations which are worth noting. Most of us did not know the organization was called Cosa Nostra until Valachi sang. We all thought it was named the Mafia. That is how little we knew about this group, despite the fact that it was a century old and had been operating in many countries with a self-perpetuating clique of leaders. We didn't even know it by its proper name. Is it not possible a political conspiracy might exist, waiting for a Joseph Valachi to testify? Like, you can apply that to what it is admitted in Life magazine with organized crime at the mafia regional level, like international level, basically. But it doesn't apply to politics, my friends. And so that's what we're saying. They asked the question, is Dr. Carol Quigley the Joseph Valachi of political conspiracies, with his basic open admission in Tragedy and Hope of this network and their existence? We see that everybody, even Life magazine, believes in some sort of conspiracy. The question is, which is the more lethal form of conspiracy, criminal or political? And what is the difference between a member of the Cosa Nostra and the communist, or more properly, an insider conspirator? Men like Lucky Luciano, who have scratched and clawed to the top of the heap in organized crime, must, of necessity, be diabolically brilliant, cunning, and absolutely ruthless. But almost without exception, the men in the hierarchy of organized crime have had no formal education. They were born into poverty and learned their trade in the back alleys of Naples, New York, or Chicago. Now suppose someone with that same amoral, grasping personality were born into a patrician family of great wealth and was educated at the best prep schools, then Harvard, Yale, or Princeton, followed by graduate work, possibly at Oxford. In these institutions, he would become totally familiar with history, economics, psychology, sociology, and political science. After having graduated from such illustrious establishments of higher learning, are we likely to find him out on the streets peddling 50-cent tickets to the numbers game? Would you find him pushing marijuana to high schoolers or running a string of houses of prostitution? Would he be getting involved in gangland killings? Not at all. For with that sort of education, this person would realize that if one wants power, real power, the lessons of history say, get into the government business. Become a politician and work for political power, or better yet, get some politicians to front for you. That's where the real power is. The real money is. So this is the whole idea. Talking about the mafia types, they're born in the streets. They get to, they rise to the top of these secret organizations. They have no formal education. Now, can you imagine somebody who does have formal education, who's raised in a family of occultists, who's likely initiated in some secret societies, and what are their aims? What are their goals? What are their territories, their turfs? Do you get what I'm saying? Like, what are their kingdoms that they're looking to conquer? Because that's how they're geared. And that's what he's pointing out. He's saying everyone knows that when you look at history and who really runs wealth, it's the governments. It's who runs governments, who runs kingdoms. Conspiracy to seize the power of government is as old as governance and government itself. We can study the conspiracy surrounding Alcibiades in Greece or Julius Caesar in ancient Rome. But we are not, and again, think about the conspiracy with regard, this is Greece and Rome, two of the previous Gentile kingdoms before the 10 toes and the environment we find ourselves in now. So they're pointing directly back to that prophetic glance at, hey, we're seeing the same patterns here. But we are not supposed to think that men today scheme to achieve political power. Every conspirator has two things in common with every other conspirator. He must be an accomplished liar and a far-seeing planner. Whether you are studying Hitler, Alcibiades, Julius Caesar, or some of our contemporary conspirators, you will find that their patient planning is almost overwhelming. We repeat FDR's statement. In politics, nothing happens by accident. If it happens, you can bet it was planned that way. So in reality, communism is a tyranny planned by power seekers whose most effective weapon is the big lie. And if one takes all the lies of communism and boils them down, you will find they distill into two major lies, out of which all others spring. They are: communism is inevitable, and communism is a movement of the downtrodden masses rising up against exploiting bosses. So let's explore those two. So he says, let's go back to our imaginary survey and analyze our first big lie of communism, that it is inevitable. And that's not an argument that I hear, or that I ever heard growing up. So to me, I have to kind of okay, take your word for it that this is the message. But so that's just me making a thought. You will recall that we asked our interviewee if he was for or against communism, and then we asked him to define it. Now we are going to ask him, sir, do you think communism is inevitable in America? And in almost every case, the response will be something like, oh, well, no, I don't think so. You know how Americans are. We're a little slow sometimes in reacting to danger. You remember Pearl Harbor. But the American people would never sit still for communism. It's kind of a naive response, but he's plotting out the dialogue here. He says, next we will ask, well then, do you think socialism is inevitable in America? The answer in almost every case will be similar to this. I'm no socialist, you understand, but I see what's going on in this country, so yeah, I'd have to say that socialism is inevitable. Then we ask our interviewee, since you say you're not a socialist, but you feel the country is being socialized, why don't you do something about it? His response will rim, I'm only one person. Besides, it's inevitable. You can't fight City Hall. Don't you know that the boys down in City Hall are going to do everything they can to convince you of that? How effectively can you oppose anything if you feel your opposition is futile? And we get this a lot too. There's a lot of the doomers online who don't want to talk about conspiracy because what can you do about it? I just want to focus on what I can handle. Like that's the tough man, dumb intellectual response. Like I say dumb intellectual, like that's the low IQ response to an avoidance to looking into conspiratorial history. To say like, well, I know they're all above us. Like, what's the point? Well, the point is we've been commanded by the prophet for one, or the Lord for one, to study these things and become aware with them, and not to treat them with such contempt like that. Like that's a rigorous ignorance that is expressed when people say that. Okay. Then we will ask our interviewee, blah, blah, blah. Oh, I'm just one person. How effectively can you oppose anything if you feel your opposition is futile? Giving your opponent the idea that defending himself is futile is as old as warfare itself. In about 500 BC, the Chinese warlord philosopher Sun Tzu stated, supreme excellence in warfare lies in the destruction of your enemy's will to resist in advance of perceptible hostilities. We call it Psy-war, or psychological warfare today. In poker, it is called running a good bluff. The principle is the same. And if you, perhaps you've watched one of my Watchmen episode with Chris Hardman, we went over the history of psychology. Well, just kind of a quick glance and lightning flash glance at the history of propaganda and psychological warfare, and how in World War I especially, it really started to amp up. But that today, we're amidst a psychological war in everything that we do. Like everybody who's online on X is in the middle of a psychological war. And so to see things in this framing and to understand that like part of that war is to make you feel like you can't do anything. But everything they're asking us to do is to speak up, to stand up, to teach others, to share, to warn, to make this part of the conversation, to educate ourselves about our constitutional rights, about the threats to our government, to America, like that kind of stuff. Like just speaking about it is going to drive us to take action in it. So how effectively, blah, blah, blah. Sun Tzu stated this stuff, Psy-war, we're moving on. Thus we have the American people. They're anti-communist, but unable to define it. And they're anti-socialist, but they think that it's inevitable. Now, how did Karl Marx view communism? How important is the inevitability of communism to the communists? What do the communists want you to believe is inevitable? Communism or socialism? Now, if you study Marx's Communist Manifesto, you will find that, in essence, Marx said the proletarian revolution would establish the socialist dictatorship of the proletariat. So again, this is the lower class rising up in a revolution to establish a dictatorship for the people, like that. That's the idea. To achieve the socialist dictatorship of the proletariat, three things would have to be accomplished. 1, the elimination of all right to private property. 2, the dissolution of the family unit. And 3, and the dissolution of the family unit was a way to prevent the transfer of wealth. Again, think of these big monopoly families like the Rockefellers and JP Morgans and blah, 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 like how they just hide everything in family trusts, organizations, and structures and pass it generationally down. That's the idea of you dissolve the family and you can get access to those funds, essentially, basically. I mean, there's more to it. It's multifaceted, but. And 3, the destruction of what Marx referred to as the opiate of the people, religion. So eliminate private property, dissolve the family unit, and destroy religion. So these 3 things have to happen for the socialist dictatorship to be accomplished. Marx went on to state that when the dictatorship of the proletariat had accomplished these 3 things throughout the world, and after some undetermined length of time, as you can imagine, he was very vague on this point, the all-powerful state would miraculously wither away and state socialism would give way to communism. You wouldn't need any government at all. Everything would be peace, sweetness, and light, and everybody would live happily ever after. But first, all communists must work to establish socialism. So you can see Karl Marx really believing, or can't you just see Karl Marx really believing that an omnipotent state would wither away? Or can you imagine that a Joseph Stalin or any other man with the cunning and ruthlessness necessary to rise to the top of the heap in an all-powerful dictatorship, would they voluntarily dismantle the power that they had built by fear and terror? Are they just going to give it up and be like, okay, yeah, we're communists now. Like, we did it, guys. No. That's the lie. Socialism would be the bait, the excuse to establish the dictatorship. Since dictatorship is hard to sell in idealistic terms, the idea had to be added that the dictatorship was just a temporary necessity and would soon dissolve of its own accord. You really have to be naive to swallow that, but millions do. The drive to establish socialism, not communism, is at the core of everything the communists and the insiders do. Now here's a picture of Karl Marx in the manifesto. And here's this little connection here. This reference is important because I think we'll track through this. But Karl Marx was hired by a mysterious group who called themselves the League of Just Men. And he was hired to write the Communist Manifesto as a demagogic boob bait, is what they call it here, to appeal to the mob. In actual fact, the Communist Manifesto was in circulation for many years before Marx's name was widely enough recognized to establish his authorship for the Revolutionary Handbook. All Karl Marx really did was to update and codify the very same revolutionary plans and principles set down 70 years earlier by Adam Weishaupt, the founder of the Order of Illuminati in Bavaria. And it is widely acknowledged by serious scholars of this subject that the League of Just Men was simply an extension of the Illuminati, which was forced to go deep underground after it was exposed by a raid in 1786 conducted by the Bavarian authorities. So here you have, again, these illuminist ideas, these materialist, rationalistic ideas that, as Taft Benson's pointing to, being erroneous, filled with errors. And it's the same group, this Illuminati, who infiltrates different organizations and power structures to what? To structure their world after their own egalitarian, like materialistic ideologies. Their enlightenment, their illuminists. So it goes Weishaupt to the League of Just Men, which would have been in the I'm going to make a thing here for it, just to remind myself to update this. And I would say the League of Just Men and the Communist Party, because I think the Communist Party, or the Communist Communist League, maybe is what it's called. I can't remember. I think the League of Just Men turns into the Communist League or the Communist something. They want like revolutionary, violent upheaval of the proletariat, right? Like they want, you got to overthrow the government. Like this is what Stalin and all of them start trying in their own ways. Ho Chi Minh and all of them start trying these things in their own way. But the Illuminist revolutionary view, like the Illuminati view, was more anti-clerical, anti-establishment, more subversive, like more secretive, more subvert and convert from within. Whereas the League of Just Men was like the overt, violent revolution arm of things. But then it softens up as you get the Fabian Society, copy, paste, which would be probably on this side of things. But the Fabian Socialist Society is much more in line with its way of operating, its modus operandi, and its goals and aims with the Illuminati and Adam Weishaupt and things. So you can see the progression where it goes through the League of Just Men, communist, hard revolution to soft revolution, and through process of time with the Fabian strategy of waiting and subverting, and then like just through long, small gains, basically. Putting people in the right spot, subverting organizations, bringing your own people in, that kind of thing. So there's this tether of Enlightenment, rationalism, Illuminist ideas that goes from Adam Weishaupt to the League of Just Men, through Karl Marx, the Communist Manifesto, out into the world as the lever and tool of these conspiring men. Now there's a book too. Let me pull it up. I think it's John Robison. This is like the conspiracy manual. What is it? Like all religion and government. Proofs of a Conspiracy. Yes. So this is a book that like our founding fathers would have been aware of. I have a copy that looks like this. So this would be a book to look into to tie how Adam Weishaupt and the Illuminati were accused by many at the time of the Revolution of America and all this stuff and the French Revolution of having, once they were caught as the Illuminati, mainly rebranded by infiltrating Freemasonry and Freemason lodges, and using Freemasonry like a skin glove, like as a means to perpetuate their ideas amongst the elite of society. So this is what was being warned against by John Robison, who was I think he was some type of scholar. Who was he? Let me see. Like, he was somebody who was respected. Let me type in John Robison, just that. Yeah, British physicist and mathematician, a professor of natural philosophy at Edinburgh. Following the French Revolution, became disenchanted with elements of the Enlightenment. So here was exactly what we're talking about. He authored Proofs of Conspiracy in 1797, a polemic accusing Freemasonry of being infiltrated by Weishaupt's Order of the Illuminati. His son was the inventor, Sir John Robinson, blah, blah, blah. Okay, so this is the book I'm talking about, that if we wanted to find more information about this jump and transition from Illuminati into what was pushing politics in the 1800s, which would have been Freemasonry for sure, like all through 1800s. This is why members of the church, early church, most early founding fathers and city builders were a group of fraternal orders, whether it was the Masons or something else. That was the means of getting things done. That's how networks of power were established. That's how nodes of light pass information and enlightenment to each other. So it's important. But this would be the book to kind of connect those dots that is being presented here in this book, is what I would say. So just kind of as a touch point. Okay. And yeah, it's I maybe on my own time do more of a dive into the Fabian Society versus the Illuminati and their beliefs and things like that, and do a comparison. Because I know the League of Just Men and Karl Marx and all them, they were very like violent with their intentions of any means necessary, whereas there was still some, well, I don't know. I would just say that maybe they're just two different instruments with different looks, different styles, different veneers. This one's the blunt force instrument, and this one's the quiet instrument, the delicate instrument of pushing socialism and communism and ultimately tyranny. That's the end goal, right? Global conquest. A government that you can come in and just take over, that you have ability to monopolize. That's what all this aim is. And you just got to bring all the nations into it, and then you have global conquest. That's the idea of the Illuminists here. This is their fake millennium that I keep talking about and referencing, of this dispensation of deceit. While they want to tell us it's about these social principles of egalitarian ideas, of everybody should be equal and this and that, that's the skin suit, that's the sheepskin that these wolves wear, are the social policies. And this is what Ezra Taft Benson pointed to when he said that they're sneaking in like evil things in their social policy and the things that they call pushing social equality forward, like they're bombs, they're sour fruit, they're poison apples. All right. Marx and all of his successors in the communist movement have ordered their followers to work on building socialism. If you go hear an official communist speaker, he never mentions communism. He will speak only of the struggle to complete the socialization of America. I'm thinking of Yuri Bezmenov as well. When he came defected from the Soviet Union, he was an Indian handler, meaning he's handling the Indians, those Indians, right? And he came to America, and he kind of spilled all the beans on how this process of socialization is the ultimate aim of communist governments. It's not communism that they're looking to come and convince you of. It's socialization. Social programs that they can come in the guise of something appealing to your fellow man, and that second great commandment of treating your fellow man with the respect and dignity that you treat yourself, right? Or that you would treat others. That's the virtue that they play on to bring in socialism, this tyranny. Now, many members of the establishment push this same theme of socialism. The September 1970 issue of the New York Magazine contains an article by Harvard professor John Kenneth Galbraith, himself a professed socialist, entitled Richard Nixon and the Great Socialist Revival. In describing what he calls the Nixon game plan, Galbraith states, Mr. Nixon is probably not a great reader of Marx, but his advisors, and that's key for me. And this goes back to Dustin's question, or I don't know if he's still here, Dustin, but Gad the Rad, what's up? Welcome to the stream. I think Dustin was here earlier, and he asked that question about Nixon being a Rockefeller Republican, and yeah, this plays into that very thing, that here he is being described by a socialist in the inner circle, probably of elitist in his field of academia or his compartment, and he's praising Nixon's utility to the socialist grand plan. That Nixon is, it says here, I'll just read what he wrote. Mr. Nixon is probably not a great reader of Marx, but his advisors, Dr. Burns, Schultz, and McCracken, are excellent scholars who know him well and could have brought the president abreast. And it is beyond denying that the crisis that aided the rush into socialism was engineered by the administration. So again, there's this administration bureaucracy class that's really pulling the levers behind the mask, who is the president. Dr. Galbraith began his article by stating, certainly the least predicted development under the Nixon administration was this great new thrust to socialism. One encounters people who still aren't aware of it. Others must be rubbing their eyes. For certainly the portents seemed all to the contrary. As an opponent of socialism, Mr. Nixon seemed steadfast. Now, Galbraith then proceeds to list the giant steps towards socialism taken by the Nixon administration. The conclusion one draws from the article is that socialism, whether it be from the Democrat or Republican parties, is inevitable. Fellow Harvard socialist Dr. Arthur Schlesinger has said much of the same thing. The chief liberal gains in the past generally remain on the statute books when the conservatives recover power. Liberalism grows constantly more liberal, and by the same token, conservatism grows constantly less conservative. This has been a talking point for the last how many years now in our modern day politics, 2020 plus, right? Where you look at the scale of politics, and the people calling themselves conservatives are like the liberals of the 1970s, 80s, because the scale has continued to go left. Socialized. That's what we're talking about. Moving left. Many extremely patriotic individuals have innocently fallen for the conspiracy's line. Walter Trohan, columnist emeritus for the Chicago Tribune and one of America's outstanding political commentators, has accurately noted, it is a known fact that the policies of the government today, whether Republican or Democratic, are closer to the 1932 platform of the Communist Party than they are to either of their own party platforms in that critical year. More than 100 years ago, in 1848 to be exact, Karl Marx promulgated his program for the socialized state in the Communist Manifesto. And Mr. Trohan had also been led to believe that the trend is inevitable. He said, conservatives should be realistic enough to recognize that this country is going deeper into socialism and will see expansion of federal power, whether Republicans or Democrats are in power. The only comfort they may have is that the pace will be slower under Richard M. Nixon than it might have been under Hubert H. Humphrey. Conservatives are going to have to recognize that the Nixon administration will embrace most of the socialism of the Democratic administrations while professing to improve it. So they didn't admit it. It's just they promise one thing and then they do what benefits the clique, what benefits the communist conspirators behind the scene, right? The insiders, as they call them in the book. And moving on. The establishment promotes the idea of the inevitability of communism through its perversion of terms used in describing the political spectrum. See chart 1. So here's chart 1 and 2. But this first one up top, all the way on the left, you have dictatorship. And then in the middle, you have good democracy. And then on the right, you have dictatorship. So those are the two extremes. This is the false dialectic that they have us in right now. Where on the one end, you can be anti-communist. Oh, I'm against communism. But on the other end, they call us fascists, which is basically also socialism. It's also communism, guys, when they call you a fascist, okay? Communism, Fabian socialism, fascism. So across the board, no matter what side of the spectrum they want to paint somebody on, it's all socialist. And that's the key. It's a floating pendulum that has no anchor on reality. They can just move it wherever they want. I talk about this a lot in my writings, the plumb line, and how the floating building of Lehi's vision, you're able to do this, not just with politics and social ideologies that we're talking about, like communism or political ideologies, but also in scientific ideologies, like I like to talk about, like uniformitarianism and catastrophism and these types of also conflicts. They move the dialectic the same way in scientific conspiracy. All right, let's see here. We are told that on the far left of the political spectrum we find communism, which is admittedly dictatorial. But We are also told that equally to be feared is the opposite of the far left, i.e., the far right, which is labeled as fascism. We are constantly told that we should all try to stay in the middle of the road, which is termed democracy, but by which the establishment means Fabian or creeping socialism. So what they call democracy is creeping socialism, Fabian socialism. And this is something that I point out. Maybe I pointed it out in an earlier research stream when I was going over these initially. I've got the internet blow up after World War II, where you have DARPA releasing the internet and information. And post-World War II, our CIA and military-industrial complex, instead of focusing primarily on connected battles, started to focus on mind wars using the internet, using free speech to promote democracy around the world. And we can say free speech and democracy are buzzwords or keywords in this conspiracy to topple your government, to signify color revolution, essentially, because what they mean in terms of democracy is not everybody gets a say and it's the voice of the people. It's this false dichotomy, this dialectic that we're describing here, as democracy is actually just Fabian socialism. So we'll get you no matter what. Like, we're coming for that democracy. That's how the military-industrial complex has used us as a hammer. So it's sad, but it's the reality. The fact that the middle of the road has been moving inexorably leftward for 40 years is ignored. And here we are 40 years after this. And now look at where conservatism and leftism and stuff is. Like, our populist conservative president right now was a Democrat, Donald Trump. Everybody supporting him, RFK, Elon Musk, Tulsi Gabbard. These were all Democrat people, not just a few years ago. But do you see, this is what I'm talking about? Like this, the whole, everything has shifted. We are constantly told, or actually I just read that. Here is an excellent example of the use of false alternatives. We are given the choice between communism, international socialism, on one end of the spectrum, Nazism, National Socialism on the other end, or Fabian socialism in the middle. The whole spectrum is socialist. So there you have it. And here's how it should be. The bottom here should be anarchy on the far side, where total government on the one side, right? You have total government on one side, anarchy on the other. And close to the spectrum of anarchy and leaning towards the middle, you have constitutional republic, a limited government. Like, that's what the Constitution was originally. And I think they go through this, but this is how it should be. Yet we're forced into this fake dialectic between, oh, if you're anti-communist and you're calling me a communist, well, then you must be a Nazi. See, they're just pointing one socialist to the other. I got accused of this last year by another, just say prominent Latter-day Saint, quote unquote, influencer who is totally bought into communist, socialist, like secret combination ideas and glorifies them. And he accused me of being a fascist, a Nazi supporter because of my anti-communist Ezra Taft Benson supporting position. But see, he's playing in this false dichotomy. And I don't live in that world. And so it's funny when people want to call me a Nazi when I'm not a Nazi, like at all. I'm a constitutional Republican, or a constitutionalist, a purist, right? I'm a Zionist. Put it that way. So it's funny. But again, when you have truth and you have nothing to hide, like false accusations like that, the people who know you know how false and wrong it is, and people just expose themselves. So, okay. This is absurd, these false alternatives. Where would you put an anarchist on the spectrum? This one at the top. Where do you put a person who believes in a constitutional republic and the free enterprise system? He is not represented here. Yet this spectrum is used for political definitions by a probable 90% of the people of the nation. There is an accurate political spectrum, see chart 2, where communism is, by definition, total government. That's communism, fascism, socialism, Pharaohism, Caesarism. If you have total government, it makes little difference whether you call it communism, fascism, socialism, Caesarism, or Pharaohism. It's all pretty much the same from the standpoint of the people who must live and suffer under it. If total government, by any of its pseudonyms, stands on the far left, then by logic the far right should represent anarchy or no government. That makes sense. So here's that chart. Depicts a false left-right political spectrum used by liberals, which has communism, international socialism, on the far left, and its twin, fascism, national socialism, on the far right, with the middle of the road being Fabian socialism. The entire spectrum is socialist. So this is the trap that they want to get you in today. Chart 2 is a more rational political spectrum with total government in any form on the far left and no government or anarchy on the far right. The U.S. was a republic with a limited government, but for the past 60 years, so again, if this is 1985 and he's going back 60 years, he's going back to the 20s, he's going back to Woodrow Wilson and all this. He's saying, for the past 60 years, the CFR, we have been moving leftward across the spectrum towards total government with each new piece of socialist legislation. And these are the two logos, one for anarchy, right? And the other for Fabian socialism, which is a wolf wearing sheep's clothing. And that's the real logo. Yes, my friends, that is the real logo of the Fabian Society. Straight from their website, straight from their history. It's a wolf in sheep's clothing. For the right moment you must wait, as Fabius did most patiently, when warring against Hannibal though many censured his delays. But when the time comes you must strike hard, as Fabius did, or your waiting will be in vain and fruitless. Yeah, their aim is to bring about socialist society by means of intellectual debate, the publication of books and pamphlets, and the permeation of socialist ideals into the universities, the press, the government institutions, and political parties. So this is it, the Fabian strategy that we're talking about here. And it's a wolf in sheep's clothing. Just how perfect, how biblical. Our founding fathers revolted against the near total government of the English monarchy, but they knew that having no government at all would lead to chaos, so they set up a constitutional republic with a very limited government. They knew that men prospered in freedom. Although the free enterprise system is not mentioned specifically in the Constitution, it is the only one which can exist under a constitutional republic. And I would say a free enterprise open system, one that is open internationally to trade, to railways, to just exchanges of good and humanity, and not like closed nationalistic, not a closed society or system, but an open society with a free enterprise. That would be my caveat. Okay, all collectivist systems, which would be communism, socialism, like collecting everything to a central power, a central government, and then distributing it. All collectivist systems require power in government which the Constitution did not grant. Our founding fathers had no intention of allowing the government to become an instrument to steal the fruit of one man's labor and give it to another who had not earned it. Our government was to be one of severely limited powers. Thomas Jefferson said, "In questions of power, then let no more be heard of confidence in man, but bind him down from mischief by the chains of the Constitution." Jefferson knew that if the government were not enslaved, the people soon would be. It was Jefferson's view that government governs best which governs least. Our forefathers established this country with the very least possible amount of government. Although they lived in an age before automobiles, electric lights, and television, they understood human nature and its relation to political systems far better than do most Americans today. Times change, technology changes, but principles are eternal. Primarily, government was to provide for national defense and to establish a court system. But we have burst the chains that Jefferson spoke of, and for many years now, we have been moving leftward across the political spectrum towards collectivist total government. Every proposal by our political leaders, including some which are supposed to have the very opposite effect, such as Nixon's revenue-sharing proposal, they carry us further leftward to centralized government. This is not because socialism is inevitable. It is no more inevitable than Pharaohism. It is largely the result of clever planning and patient gradualism. That's the Fabian socialism model. It's gradualism. Over time. Get your gains where you can, and then just continue to get gains until you've moved the goalposts totally to where you want them to be. Since all communists and their insider bosses are waging a constant struggle for socialism, let us define that term. Socialism is usually defined as government ownership and or control over the basic means of production and distribution of goods and services. When analyzed, this means government control over everything, including you. All controls are people controls. If the government controls these areas, it can eventually do just exactly as Marx set out to do, destroy the right to private property, and eliminate the family and wipe out religion. We are being socialized in America, and everybody knows it. If we had a chance to sit down and have a cup of coffee with the man on the streets that we had been interviewing, he might say, "You know, the one thing I can never figure out is why all these very, very wealthy people like the Kennedys, the Fords, the Rockefellers, and others are for socialism. Why are the super rich for socialism? Don't they have the most to lose?" I take a look at my bank account and compare it with Nelson Rockefeller's, and it seems funny that I'm against socialism and he's out there promoting it. Now, is it funny? In reality, there is a vast difference between what the promoters define as socialism and what is in actual practice, or what it is in actual practice. The idea that socialism is a share the wealth program is strictly a confidence game to get the people to surrender their freedom to an all-powerful collectivist government. While the insiders tell us we are building a paradise on earth, we are actually constructing a jail for ourselves. And this is the language I always bring in, where they're building their own new millennium, where they get to be the elite, and we are the slave class in that millennium. They get to live their millennium off our backs and our sweat. Doesn't it strike you as strange that some of the individuals pushing hardest for socialism have their own personal wealth protected in family trusts and tax-free foundations? Men like Rockefeller, Ford, and Kennedy are for every socialist program known to man which will increase your taxes, yet they pay little, if anything, in taxes themselves. An article published by the North American newspaper Alliance in August of 1967 tells how the Rockefellers pay practically no income taxes despite their vast wealth. The article reveals that one of the Rockefellers paid a grand total of $685 personal income tax during a recent year. The Kennedys have their Chicago Merchandise Mart, their mansions, yachts, planes, etc., all owned by their myriads of family foundations and trusts. Taxes are for peons. Yet hypocrites like Rockefeller, Ford, and Kennedy pose as great champions of the downtrodden. If they were really concerned about the poor, rather than using socialism as a means of achieving personal political power, they would divest themselves of their own fortunes. There is no law which prevents them from giving away their own fortunes to the poverty-stricken. Shouldn't all these men set an example and practice what they preach? Now, this is very facetious, obviously, this point that they're making, but it's accurate in the sense that if you really believed in these philosophies, that you should force the world to believe them, why aren't you leading the way with, practicing what you preach? And I think this is where our church and the dispensation of the fullness of times gives a good example of our leaders living these principles, these first principles and ordinances and the beyond ones, that we try to live them, that we are not hypocritical in them. Yet for these insiders, we're seeing that it's hypocritical, it's lies, ideas, and the inevitability of accepting them that they use as their main vectors for pushing forward their belief system on everyone. If they are advocating sharing the wealth, shouldn't they start with their own instead of that of the middle class, which pays almost all the taxes? Why don't Nelson Rockefeller and Henry Ford II give away all their wealth, retaining only enough to place themselves at the national average? Can't you imagine Teddy Kennedy giving up his mansion, airplanes, and yacht, and moving into a $25,000 home with a $20,000 mortgage like the rest of us? Wow, 100 times that now. We are usually told that this clique of super rich is socialists because they have a guilt complex over wealth they inherited and did not earn. I've never heard that ever. So apparently that's an argument. We're going to read through it, but that's just a dumb one to me. But anyways, here it is. Again, they could relieve these supposed guilt complexes simply by divesting themselves of their unearned wealth. There are doubtless many wealthy do-gooders who have been given a guilt complex by their college professors, but that don't explain the actions of insiders like the Rockefellers, Fords, or Kennedys. All their actions betray them as power seekers. But the Kennedys, Rockefellers, and their super-rich confederates are not being hypocrites in advocating socialism. It appears to be a contradiction for the super-rich to work for socialism and the destruction of free enterprise, when in reality it is not. See, our problem is that most of us believe socialism is what the socialists want us to believe it is, a share the wealth program. That's the theory. But is that how it works? Well, let us examine the only socialist countries, according to the socialist definition of the word, extant in the world today. So look at the literal examples of socialism today, and is that what it is, a share the wealth program? These are communist countries. The communists themselves refer to these as socialist countries, as in the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics. Here in the reality of socialism, you have a tiny oligarchical clique at the top, usually numbering no more than 3% of the total population. This would be your elite class, controlling the total wealth, the total production, and the very lives of the other 97%. Certainly, even the most naive observe that Mr. Brezhnev doesn't live like one of the poor peasants out on the great Russian steppes. No, he's one of those Russian, what do you call them? Bajillionaires. I don't know. There's a Russian word for him. But according to socialist theory, he is supposed to do just that. If one understands that socialism is not a share the wealth program, but is in reality a method to consolidate and control the wealth, then the seeming paradox of super rich men promoting socialism becomes no paradox at all. Instead, it becomes the logical, even the perfect tool of power-seeking megalomaniacs. Communism, or more accurately, socialism, is not a movement of the downtrodden masses, but of the economic elite. The plan of the conspirator insiders is then to socialize the United States, not to communize it. So again, looking at all these isms as tools and instruments of secret combination of conspirators, of the insiders. That's exactly the way to look at this stuff, and not as just Cold War era yellow rag stuff, like yellow journalism, like scare tactic, alarmism, extremism. No, this is actually like more logical than any other explanation for historical coherence than anything any of the liberal professors at BYU who want to challenge this could ever bring up, to be like, oh, well, no, see, your conspiracy theory of history doesn't line up because all these things are accidents. Look, let me prove it to you. Like, doesn't play off when you see the same people over and over benefiting, enlarging their wealth and their control and power and dominion over these unfortunate acts that never seem to go in our favor. So how's this to be accomplished, to communize the United States? Chart 3 shows the structure of our government as established by our founding fathers. The Constitution fractionalized and subdivided governmental power in every way possible. The founding fathers believed that each branch of the government, whether at the federal, state, or local level, would be jealous of its powers and would never surrender them to a centralized control. Also, many phases of our lives, such as charity and education, were put totally or almost totally out of the grasp of politicians. Under this system, you could not have a dictatorship, under what the founding fathers originally had set up. No segment of the government could possibly amass enough power to form a dictatorship. In order to have a dictatorship, one must have a single branch holding most of the reins of power. Once you have this, a dictatorship is inevitable. So this is how it was set up, with different branches, right? We have executive, legislature, judicial. You have state governments, the courts, the city, the county. You have chastity, police, education. Oh, I guess it's charity, not chastity. Chastity too. You need a moral people. Business, finance, labor. So like all these pillars should be separate and not brought together. But that's exactly what we see democratic socialism today. Everything comes under the all-powerful head of the state, quote unquote, the blob, as some people call it, where all of these things are now regulated, directly influenced, controlled by government power. And more, that power has moved to executive power, so that whoever controls the president can, with executive action, make a lot of these regulatory changes and things that bring all this together to one handful for somebody like an antichrist to come and snatch up. Interesting. A dictatorship was impossible in our republic because power was widely diffused. Today, as we approach democratic socialism, all power is being centralized at the apex of the executive branch of the federal government. This concentration of power makes a dictatorship inevitable. Those who control the president indirectly gain virtual control of the whole country. That's bad news. And with continuity of government post-World War II being implemented by Eisenhower and others, like this whole idea that the executive branch or some other body could just take control of the government in some event, right, dictated by the bureaucracy, is frightening. And this is the concern of a lot of people today, that this type of thing is happening now between the transfer of power from Donald Trump the first time to Joe Biden and back here now, that there's some type of continuity of government shenanigans going on behind the scenes that is consolidating power in a form more like this, to either be snatched up or it could be reestablished like a constitutional republic. But that the power is all being gathered at one central point is inevitable right now. It really is happening. And that's kind of the fight that I see Donald Trump and his side, the propaganda side on his arm, have won at the moment. But I don't think that we have seen yet the response of the previous power seekers and holders against his attempt to grasp power from them, if that made sense. The English philosopher Thomas Hobbes noted, "Freedom is government divided into small fragments." Now he's going to quote a bunch of support for this idea. Woodrow Wilson, before he became a tool of the insiders, he observed that this history of liberty is a history of the limitations of governmental power, not the increase of it. And the English historian Lord Acton, after Joseph Smith, commented, "Power tends to corrupt, and absolute power corrupts absolutely." Even though these men lived after our Constitution was written, our forefathers understood these principles completely. But what is happening today? As we move leftward along the political spectrum towards socialism, all the reins of power are being centralized in the executive branch of the federal government. Much of this is being done by buying with legislation or with free federal grants of all other entities, free federal grants, all the other entities. Money is used as bait, and the hook is federal control. The Supreme Court has ruled, and in this case, quite logically, that it is hardly lack of due process for the government to regulate that which it subsidizes. So again, if you're giving them money and subsidizing them, well, then why can't we regulate you and change the rules about things? And so just another way to gain power is through bribing, essentially, is what I'm getting from this paragraph. If you and your clique wanted control over the United States, it would be impossible to take over every city hall, county seat, and state house. You would want all power vested at the apex of the executive branch of the federal government. Then you would only have to control one man to control the whole shebang. If you wanted to control the nation's manufacturing, commerce, finance, transportation, and natural resources, you would need to only control the apex, the power pinnacle of an all-powerful socialist government. Then you could have monopoly and could squeeze out all your other competitors. If you wanted a national monopoly, you must control a national socialist government. If you want a worldwide monopoly, you must control a worldwide socialist government. That is what the game is all about. Communism is not a movement of the downtrodden masses, but is a movement created, manipulated, and used by power-seeking billionaires in order to gain control over the world. First, by establishing socialist governments in the various nations, and then consolidating them all through a great merger into an all-powerful world socialist superstate, probably under the auspices of the United Nations. The balance of this book will outline just how they have used communism to approach that goal. So this is the main thesis of these books right now. Yeah, I got a bot seller. I don't know how to. I'm not a wizard yet with Twitch to even like delete them from the chat, so I just welcome them and say, welcome bot, thank you for joining the stream. But anyways, so this is the main thesis, like all the book, that none dare call it conspiracy. It's not just a fever dream about what's happening during the Cold War era, but it's identifying a longer running, deeper rooted conspiracy that goes back to the same timing of the dispensation of the fullness of times and its blossoming. Joseph Smith rising and the church being restored, and prophets of the latter days revealing truth from God to man on earth once again. But at the same time, Satan inspiring his tools and instruments of deception, creating a fake millennium, a fake Babylon, a mystery Babylon, a new Tower of Babel to reach up unto heaven themselves. And this is, again, to me, it just fits all of the markers that the Book of Mormon points us to with regards to its warning against secret combinations amongst the Gentiles in our days. That there would be a secret combination that would seek to enslave and take the freedoms from all people in all nations. That's the language that's used in the Book of Mormon. That's exactly what's being described here. So for members of the church who want to point to this book as being somehow extremist, yet they never want to get into the content of the claims being made. They want to focus, again, like we talked about, this Gus Hall level of communism, where they want to argue about Trotsky or Lenin or Marx, or if I'm defining socialism the same way that they're defining socialism, without zooming out to see that all of these are tools for evil secret combinations, wicked men, immoral men, men who do disgusting things. So I'm not persuaded by the academic intellectuals of our society, of our culture. I'm sorry. I respect them in their areas of strength and their compartments that they're in, right? Maybe they have real strong history and knowledge of church history during a certain decade because that's what they've spent their entire thesis and professional, educational career studying. Great. But when it comes to zooming out and seeing the vision of prophecy and how it connects to a one story and how that one story zoomed out allows me to lean into every single one of our prophets in the latter days and their warnings, their recommendations, their advice, their words of wisdom without dismissing them or belittling them or adding asterisks to every single one of them because they don't quite fit with my political ideology. And that's not a problem when you start to see things as a conspiracy, a cause and effect style of history. So it's my witness that this stuff is important enough for me to sit and read these boring books with you and go on for hours about this. But it really is. So at the end of this chapter here, they have an additional segment on the Rockefellers. It's like this whole conversation about the power of John Rockefeller, but I'm not going to read it. But it just goes to show, like, you can read it all if you have the book. Go ahead and read it. But and in fact, let me pull up my Kindle library. Gary Allen has a book right here. Oh, can't read it now. It's called the Rockefeller File. If you don't have it, where it goes way into Rockefeller's position as a large pawn in the grand scheme. So it's a good one. I highly recommend that. And then I think that's a good place to stop today. I don't want to get into the next chapter yet. And there's not a lot more I want to put on the board. I think I've got pretty much everything up to this point. Other than I do want to fill in, and I'm just reminding myself now, this connection here, this Illuminati to just men to Karl Marx. Because Karl Marx in the Communist Manifesto is really, it really is like the Book of Mormon of the dispensation of deceit, when you look at it this way, where that's the fruit of Satan's governmental infiltration, right? His Zion imitation. And the Book of Mormon is the fruit for true prophets to bring everything back to who? To Christ, another testament of Jesus Christ. Whereas the Communist Manifesto's goal is to entirely eliminate religion altogether. Antichrist. So it's the philosophy, it's the Antichrist Bible. The Illuminists had the same idea. They were anti-clerical, anti-religion, and they were all about this enlightenment, this love of self. And you see it in all the occult messaging, in the satanic doctrines, that you become God. They replace God and religion with the worship of yourself or of wisdom itself. And it's just as ugly. That's what I'm saying. Like, we see the balance. We understand the balance. The scriptures are full of explaining the balance. And when you lay things out like this, to me, it's very compelling to look at history this way, especially in these latter days when we have so much information unleashed upon us to be able to do this. So it's been a delight. Thank you for joining me, guys. I'm going to go ahead and end it here. And we'll be doing my stream on Sunday on the White Stone. And if you're unfamiliar with that, this is essay 3 in my Eternal Perspectives Cosmism Manifesto, which, yes, is a play on the I just had a brain fart. On the Communist Manifesto. Again, if I'm talking about underlying pillars of shaping society, I believe our temple doctrines, the cosmic doctrines that bind heaven and earth, and Christ's authority from heaven to his authority to kingdoms on earth. Cosmism Manifesto is my witness to the doctrines and pillars that Joseph Smith and the Lord have revealed in these latter days that allow us to see history through one big circumscribed lens, where I see the Communist Manifesto and theosophy and all of these occult attempts to ritualize and bring together world Eastern religions and mysticism and esotericism, all of the isms. They want to bring them all together and make their own fake story about it. And it's just obvious that it stands nothing up to the beauty and majesty of the restored gospel of Jesus Christ through Joseph Smith. And the temple doctrine, man, just the temple itself is just so amazing. Get to the temple, my friends. This is my research stream just for fun. There's no point to it or anything. So thanks for listening. If you like it, share, invite others to it, and I will post this up on YouTube when I'm done. But for now, let me get some outro music. I'll hit you with this one, and we'll fade out on this one. So good night. I'll be in the chat here while this song's going and for a little bit if you guys want to join me there.